What if we're not the first? Not the first to think, to build, to dream. Not the first to look at the sky and wonder what lies beyond it. Not the first to stand at the edge of the sea and feel the slow ache of something older watching back. What if, long before us, before mammoths, before trilobites, before the air even held enough oxygen to breathe, something else stirred beneath the sun? Not something alien, not something other, but something here, something of this planet, born from its minerals, molded by its pressures, carried forward by a different tide of time. What if there was once a kind of intelligence that rose and fell, unnoticed, not because it left no trace, but because we no longer know how to see it? We dig into the earth searching for beginnings, pressing our hands into the mud of memory. Fossils speak, strata whisper, but between these layers are silences too wide to ignore, eras where nothing remains, where even decay has decayed, and time itself has crumbled into dust. In those missing spaces, entire worlds could have lived. Whole civilizations could have risen like tides and receded just as softly, washed away by eons of wind and sea. They might not have looked like us. They might not have built with stone or metal. But they could have thought. They could have dreamed. They could have known. We often imagine time as a ladder, one rung after another, single file, upward, forward, from chaos to order, from primitive to advanced. But the earth does not climb. It cycles. It breathes. It folds and forgets. What came before is not always below. What is lost is not always gone. Some say there are no signs, no ruins, no tools. But how much can survive a billion years? Not 100, not 1,000,000, a billion. A billion years of earthquakes and eruptions, of shifting seas and drifting continents, of glaciers grinding continents to powder. A billion years of rain, a billion years of silence. Steel bends, concrete fractures, cities fall, and the earth, ever patient, swallows all. Not in anger, not in vengeance, but in the quiet rhythm of entropy. Everything dissolves. Everything returns. The tallest towers, the deepest books, the brightest thoughts, they all melt into the mantle in the end. And yet, might there be clues? Not grand monuments or buried machines, but fainter things. A spike in isotopic ratios, a curious anomaly in sediment layers, patterns in decay, echoes in the magnetic field. Could these be the whispers of something ancient, something once alive, now barely remembered by the planet itself? Geologists speak of deep time, a scale so vast, our minds slip off it like sand through fingers. The oldest rocks tell us of a world almost alien, where the oceans boiled and the skies rained acid. But even then, Earth was forming memory, through pressure, through temperature, through time. Somewhere within those memories, could there be something more than lava and carbon? Could an ancient intelligence have left behind not bones, but traces? Not tools, but consequences. Radiation scars, chemical signatures, disturbances in the natural decay of matter? We wouldn't know how to find it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Because we are only just beginning to see how easy it is to vanish. How quickly nature reclaims. A city left untended becomes forest. A highway crumbles into dust. In 10,000 years, even our satellites may fall. In 1,000,000, nothing human may remain. In 1,000,000,000, the planet could be clean again, as if we never were. So what if we weren't the first? What if intelligence is not a singular event, but a repeating one? A pulse in the Earth's long breath. A wave rising from the crust, crashing, then receding. Again and again. Forgotten not because it failed, but because forgetting is what time does best. And maybe that's the mystery. Not why we're here, but why we think we're the only ones who ever were. We look to the stars for signs of life, sending signals into the dark. But what if the real signal is here, beneath our feet, trapped in stone, waiting to be heard not by ears, but by understanding, by wonder, by the quiet willingness to admit we might not know everything. Because maybe we don't. Maybe we're walking on the ruins of something older than bones. Something that didn't need fire or flight or tools. Something that lived close to the planet's rhythm, then chose, perhaps gently, perhaps purposefully, to leave no trace. A civilization of silence. Or maybe they were like us, loud, bright, burning fast, and like us they built, and like us they vanished, and the earth, ever patient, swept them into the mantle, folded them into rock, wrote their stories in a language we can no longer read. Maybe, maybe not. But if the past can vanish this easily, if a billion years can erase the loudest song, then what else might we have forgotten? And what else might lie beneath, still waiting to be heard? The earth forgets. It forgets more than it remembers. But it does not forget everything. Beneath our cities, beneath our rivers, beneath the quiet hum of satellites passing overhead, the ground is layered like an ancient book, its pages torn, burned, and rewritten, yet still bound by time. Each layer is a sediment of silence, each fracture a pause in a sentence too long to read in one lifetime. And still, if we listen closely, if we ask gently, the planet whispers. It whispers in limestone and shale, in tilted beds of sandstone that once rippled beneath a vanished sea, in the soft imprint of a leaf no hand has ever touched. The stories are there, not in ink but in pressure, not in words but in pattern. Some stories are preserved in amber, some in ice, others in the black press of coal, born of forests that no longer exist. But most of the Earth's memory is broken. There are places where entire ages are missing. A billion years gone in a geological blink. The rock beneath us doesn't roll forward like film. It skips. It erases. It overwrites itself like an old cassette tape. What lies between those erasures we can only imagine. What dreams dissolved into magma. What cities collapsed beneath ancient tides. What knowledge ground to dust beneath tectonic plates. And yet, in that forgetting, something strange happens. The earth begins to remember, not clearly, not completely, but faintly, like a face glimpsed through fog. Memory lingers in the angle of a fault line, in the lean of fossilized shells far from any ocean, in isotopes lodged in forgotten minerals. Memory echoes in the way mountains rise and fall and rise again, as if trying to tell the same story over and over, always with different words. Even the air remembers. Trapped in bubbles beneath the ice, atmospheres from 1,000 climates ago whisper their chemistry. They tell us when the planet was warm, when it was cold, when it held more oxygen than now, enough, perhaps, to feed creatures whose size we can barely comprehend. Memory also lives in scars. Impact craters, long buried, still pulse with the energy of collisions so fierce they reshaped continents. Volcanic traps, like old wounds, leak clues of mass extinctions. Some memories burn. Some bleed. Some are silent for millions of years until we drill just deep enough or look just long enough to see the pattern. And in those patterns we begin to wonder, what if the earth doesn't just forget accidentally? What if it forgets as a form of protection? What if memory is not only what remains, but what is allowed to remain? Could some traces be hidden not by chance, but by the design of nature's deepest rhythms? Could entire histories be folded away in the crust, not lost, but waiting? Because sometimes the earth remembers when we least expect it. A fossil emerges from a cliff, smiling with teeth that haven't bitten in 400 million years. A mountain reveals ancient microbial mats, tracing breath before animals existed. A desert wind uncovers carvings in stone we never thought to find. And in those moments we glimpse not just the past, but the act of remembering itself. The earth forgets, but the forgetting is never perfect. And if memory survives in fragments, if a single shell, a single isotope, a single misplaced mineral can carry the trace of an entire vanished world, then maybe forgetting is not the end. Maybe it is a pause, a silence, a breath, a chance to look again. Because if the earth remembers anything, it remembers change. It remembers the rise and fall of oceans, the appearance of leaves, the vanishing of light. It remembers when fire shaped the land, and when ice unshaped it again. It remembers collapse. It remembers renewal. It remembers the impossible. Life out of nothing, order from heat, bones from dust. And so we ask, if the planet forgets but then remembers, What might it remember next? And more softly still, what have we yet to remember with it? Between the oldest rocks and the first signs of life as we know it, there is a silence so wide, it swallows imagination whole. It is not the quiet of peace, but of absence. No bones, no shells, no trace of movement, only stones stacked upon stone, pressed by time, sealed by pressure, and made smooth by forgetting. And yet, silence is not the same as nothing. When geologists speak of the great unconformity, that strange break where hundreds of millions of years have vanished from the record, they do so with the reverence one might reserve for a vanished library. Between the crystalline roots of Earth's oldest rocks and the sedimentary sheets that cradle early fossils lies an emptiness so immense it almost feels deliberate. Nearly a billion years erased. As if history itself took a deep breath, and the record paused. We see the evidence of what's missing only by contrast: angular gaps, abrupt boundaries, missing eras where rivers once carved through mountains that no longer exist. The pages are torn out, but the spine remains. What story could those missing layers have told? What lives might have come and gone before the fossils began to whisper their names? Maybe the silence is the record. Maybe absence itself is a kind of message, a warning, or a mercy. The Earth's crust is not a perfect archive. It burns, it folds, it drowns its memories beneath the oceanic crust. It swallows itself whole. Subduction zones drag entire landscapes downward into molten oblivion, only to recycle their minerals into something new. The result is a history rewritten not once, but endlessly. Each erasure gives birth to another beginning. Each silence a threshold. Still, we search within that hush. We crush rocks, measure isotopes, trace magnetic shifts across time. In some places, we find traces of elements slightly out of place. Anomalies that hum faintly, as if whispering, "I was here once." In others, we find nothing at all, and the nothingness itself becomes haunting. Could there have been forms of life that left no bones to fossilize, no shells to calcify, no signals to measure? Could there have been intelligence that existed not in flesh and bone, but in chemistry or resonance or pattern, too subtle to leave marks we recognize? Or is it simpler than that? Is silence just the natural consequence of time's mercy? Maybe the Earth does not forget by accident. Maybe it erases to begin again. Each silence could be a cleansing breath, a resetting of memory, preparing the world for a new attempt at awareness. And yet, not all memory is lost. Some fragments survive in the most unexpected ways. Tiny crystals, trapped in zircons older than continents, carry the isotopic fingerprints of vanished oceans. In their latticework lies the ghost of an atmosphere long gone. These microscopic relics speak not in words but in ratios. Oxygen to silicon, uranium to lead, numbers that become echoes of environments no human will ever see. The silence between the layers may not be empty after all. It may be full of information that has changed its form, that has turned inward, waiting for us to learn a new language to read it. Sometimes, when scientists date a rock, they find an age that doesn't fit. Too old, too strange, too precise to belong. These outliers are often dismissed as contamination. But what if some of them are misread memories? Artifacts not of error, but of complexity? It is tempting to imagine that within those erased ages, something stirred, something unrecorded but real. Perhaps life emerged, flourished, then perished, its traces wiped clean by tectonic movement, its cities dissolved into quartz, its thoughts compressed into the minerals that now build mountains. We will never know for certain, but uncertainty is not the enemy of wonder. It is its soil. The silence invites us to imagine, not recklessly, but gently. It invites us to see absence not as void, but as possibility. Between the oldest rocks and the fossils we know lies a span of time so immense that even the word before becomes meaningless. To think of what could have existed there is not folly. It is humility. Because the Earth's greatest truths may live not in what has been found, but in what has been lost. The silence between the layers hums faintly beneath every step we take. We walk upon it daily, unaware. Beneath our feet lies not emptiness, but the compressed echo of forgotten worlds. And if we listen, really listen, we may begin to hear the murmur of something more ancient than time itself. And yet, if silence can hide 1 billion years so effortlessly, what other histories might it still be keeping secret? The Earth is not a gentle archivist. It does not preserve, it reclaims. It does not protect, it transforms. Over the vast sweep of geologic time, it shreds more than it stores, reshapes more than it remembers. What we call the past is not a quiet library, but a battlefield of matter and memory, where every trace is under siege by erosion, by heat, by pressure. Wind grinds mountains into dust. Rain softens stone into sand. Glaciers carve valleys from bedrock as if slicing through butter. Plate tectonics shatter and consume, dragging entire seafloors deep beneath the crust, where molten heat melts even the hardest rock into liquid forgetfulness. The surface of the planet is in motion, forever shifting, collapsing, and rebuilding. This is the great geological shredder. No monument escapes it. No city, no cave painting, no fossil is truly safe. Over millions of years, let alone billions, entropy wins. Even the strongest structures crumble, not from sudden violence, but from patient, invisible forces. Freeze and thaw, acid and salt, time and tide. And yet we ask, quietly, wonderingly, could something survive that? Could something, somewhere, resist the Earth's hunger to forget? If a civilization existed 1 billion years ago, long before the dinosaurs, long before even the simplest multicellular life we now recognize, what kind of trace could possibly endure? What could be strong enough, strange enough, unnatural enough, to slip through the shredder's teeth? We think of stone as permanence. But even mountains are fleeting on this scale. The Himalayas are young. The Rockies younger still. All will eventually collapse, their granite hearts returning to sand. But certain materials behave differently. Some isotopes outlive memory. Plutonium-244, for instance, with a half-life of 80 million years, whispers long after its kin have gone silent. Could an ancient civilization, if it ever existed, have left behind materials not known in nature? Polymers unbreakable by bacteria? Alloys immune to oxidation? Could they have built not with stone, but with elements tailored to outlast even time? Some theorists point to technofossils, man-made objects buried deep enough to escape immediate decay. A piece of synthetic plastic, sealed in sediment, might outlast even languages. A circuit board, if crushed and mineralized, could leave behind a strangely ordered imprint, a shape not made by sea or tree. But would we recognize it? Or would it be dismissed as anomaly, just another curious rock? And then there are glassy materials, vitrified forms that resist change for millions of years. In nuclear test sites, we've already created such things, trinitite, green and glossy, born of atomic fire. If we can do this without meaning to, what might another intelligence have done with intention? The core of the question is not just what can endure, but what we are capable of noticing. The geological shredder may erase evidence, but it also changes it, disguises it. Perhaps what survives is no longer recognizable as artifact, but has become something else. A mineral, a magnetism, a trace of heat still echoing in cooled stone. In South Africa, there are rock formations more than 3 billion years old. Banded iron, tight and folded, testaments to oceans and oxygen long vanished. Within those folds are isotopic irregularities, chemical blurs, structural oddities we sometimes interpret as natural, because we assume they must be. But what if they are not? What if something tried to leave a message not in language, but in the structure of stone itself? A signal too slow for us to hear, a resonance too deep for us to feel. What if geology is not the problem, but the medium? Still, even the hardest forms yield to the Earth's deeper rhythms. The crust bends. The mantle flows. Heat reshapes the coldest relics. Over deep time, nothing is immune. And so, if anything is to survive 1 billion years, it must be woven into the process itself. Not separate from geology, but part of it. Could intelligence have encoded itself into cycles of magnetic reversal? Into the slow tilt of Earth's axis? Into the changing ratio of carbon to oxygen in the air? Could thought be fossilized not in things, but in rhythms? It's an impossible question. And yet, the Earth is full of patterns we don't fully understand. Stripes in ocean crust oddly regular. Layers of volcanic ash, spaced too evenly. Microscopic spheres of metal, found where no industry should have touched. We explain most of them, but not all. Maybe it's nothing. Probably it's nothing. But still, we wonder, could someone, have passed this way before and been swallowed whole? And if so, what did they know of impermanence? Did they try to resist it, or did they embrace it? Did they leave behind messages meant to last, or choose silence, knowing that even silence leaves a shape? Because if anything can survive the geological shredder, it will not be loud. It will not be obvious. It will not announce itself in headlines or pyramids or golden discs. It will be quiet, subtle, nearly gone, and we may already be walking on it, brushing against it, mistaking it for the ordinary. And yet, if something can endure this long, hiding beneath the weight of the world, what kind of intelligence would choose that path? What kind of story would it be trying to tell? What happens to a city after 1 billion years? Not 100, not 1,000, not a stretch of time we can picture with crumbling buildings and rusted cars, but 1 billion years, so far beyond memory that even the mountains would no longer remember their names. So far that the continents would have drifted apart, collided, and been reborn. So far that nothing human would remain. The streets would vanish first. Asphalt, designed for decades, not millennia, would crack under the weight of root and rain. Concrete, slow to erode, would still surrender. Its sharp edges melting into rounded ghosts, its rebar skeletons rusting quietly, then disintegrating into flakes of iron swallowed by the soil. Skyscrapers, once proud, would tumble in silence. Glass would shatter, metals would fatigue, and time would press every structure downward, folding them into the earth's slow breath. In 10,000 years, a forest. In 1 million, a valley. In 100 million, perhaps a sea. And yet, not everything vanishes so easily. Some materials resist forgetting. Plastics, for one, fragments of our age embedded into layers of sediment like artificial shells. They may not last 1 billion years, but they might last long enough to leave strange polymers fused into stone. A new kind of rock. A technofossil. Could a city, crushed and transformed, become not ruins but geology? Could a plastic spoon become a fossil? Could a smartphone, long since dead, be compressed into a seam of layered elements so specific, so unlikely, that it sings of design? Even our atoms may leave whispers. Certain isotopes, born in nuclear reactors and weapons, do not decay quickly. Traces of cesium, iodine, plutonium, they don't belong in nature's usual rhythm. And though the Earth tries to erase them, some will resist for millennia. Perhaps longer, their presence subtle, out of place, like footprints left where no one should have walked. We call these things anthropogenic markers, human-made echoes in the strata. But what if they are not uniquely ours? What if, long before us, something else manipulated matter, altered chemistry, created artifacts too strange to recognize? Maybe they didn't build cities. Maybe they shaped matter in ways we cannot see. Maybe their legacy isn't in structures, but in compositions, ratios, anomalies mistaken for errors in data. Maybe they seeded minerals that don't match the geology around them, or left behind perfectly spherical objects too uniform for coincidence. We've already found such things. Mysteries buried deep in ancient seams. Metallic spheres in billion-year-old rock. Unexplained formations of rare alloys. Often dismissed, often forgotten. But could some of them be more than curiosities? Could they be relics of a past intelligence that, like us, tried to leave its mark? Or perhaps the opposite is true. Perhaps they did not try to be remembered at all. Perhaps they understood what we are only just beginning to learn, that nothing survives forever, not even legacy. And so they built to disappear. A civilization that knew the Earth would one day reclaim every structure might choose to encode its memory differently. In the DNA of bacteria, perhaps. In the spin of particles. In vibration or sound, etched into the quantum hum of the planet. forms of memory we don't yet know how to access. Because dust is not emptiness. Dust is memory, scattered. A city, ground to powder, does not cease to exist. It simply changes its shape. The minerals remain. The elements endure. The story, though unreadable to us now, may still be written in a language of entropy and trace. And if we, the builders of glass and steel, can be forgotten so easily, then what else might have been? What stories lie in the sediment beneath our feet, misfiled by time, unrecognized by our limited gaze? The earth does not care for monuments. It does not honor legacy. It softens, blends, buries. And yet, within that burial, something remarkable happens. Matter is preserved by accident. A tooth, a shard, a chemical anomaly. And though context is lost, the question remains. What is this? Why is it here? So we dig and we wonder. Could this layer, this thin, strange line in the rock, be a civilization dissolved into dust? Could this element, barely detectable, be the residue of technology too old to imagine? And if so, could we, too, one day become dust of the forgotten, our entire world pressed into a layer half a millimeter thick, waiting for someone else to wonder what we were? Or perhaps they already have. Perhaps we are standing on their dust now, breathing it, walking through it, asking the same questions they once did. And if dust remembers, even faintly, what stories might still be hiding in the quiet weight beneath us? Time does not pass, it accumulates. Layer by layer, moment by moment, it settles into the earth. But it does not settle evenly. It doesn't leave neat signatures or tidy labels. Instead, it leaves patterns, ratios, imbalances, tiny shifts in the building blocks of matter that mark the breadth of ages. Carbon, uranium, and lead, these are the timekeepers of the earth. Not clocks in the way we understand, but slow, whispering guides that decay with exquisite predictability. Their half-lives are long and patient. Carbon-14, ticking away over thousands of years. Uranium-238, counting in hundreds of millions. Each decay is a quiet subtraction. Each atom lost is a moment measured. Through these atoms we read the past. We measure the age of fossils, the cooling of rocks, the burning of ancient forests. We trace the breath of animals long extinct and the formation of minerals that crystallized before the moon had settled into orbit. These elements do not speak loudly, but they speak truthfully. They tell us how long something has existed, how long ago something ended, and sometimes, if we're careful, they hint at what interrupted the silence between. But could they also speak of something else? Could they whisper of a forgotten epoch, an event not natural, but strange? Could they reveal a moment when the rhythm of decay was disrupted? A pulse, an anomaly, a signal out of place. Across the globe, in layers of sediment untouched for millions of years, scientists have found oddities. Spikes in carbon isotopes, abrupt enrichments in uranium, sudden traces of isotopes that shouldn't be there, like plutonium, a byproduct of nuclear reactions not naturally occurring on Earth. We've found it in our own time, left behind in the wake of atomic tests. But what if something like it had appeared before? Not recently, not in our history, but deep buried under kilometers of time. It's tempting to dismiss these spikes as flukes, volcanic events, cosmic rays, solar anomalies, and perhaps they are. The Earth is capable of wild drama, and stars are not shy with their radiation. But perhaps not all anomalies are accidents. If a civilization once lived before the layers we now examine, one capable of altering matter, of refining isotopes, of engineering reactions we now call nuclear, then the clues they left would not be bones or tools. They would be chemical. They would be radioactive. They would be quiet. They might exist as strange gradients in the uranium-to-lead ratio. They might be seen in the unexpected presence of technetium, or neptunium, or even isotopes we no longer produce. Not artifacts, but footprints. Not relics, but echoes, still decaying in perfect, mathematical rhythm. Still measurable if we only knew where to look. Already, we use these elements to reconstruct climate cycles, to track ancient carbon blooms, to date the darkest layers of extinction. We know when the dinosaurs vanished because of a thin line of iridium. We know of global wildfires through soot and carbon signatures. So what else might we find just slightly out of place? There's a kind of shiver in the science, an unease. Because to find such an anomaly would be to admit that we are not alone in Earth's long story. That the story itself is far older, far deeper than we imagined. And the older the story, the harder it is to read. Isotopes fade. Radiation blurs. Geology does not label its records for convenience. A spike, even if found, could always be explained away. But what if the real story is not in one spike, but in a pattern? A repetition of anomalies, spaced across impossible time, each one too strange to be coincidence. Some researchers speak of nuclear signatures in unexpected layers. Others warn against overinterpretation. But still, the data persists. Still, the Earth holds its breath. Maybe 1 billion years ago, something happened. A detonation, an experiment, a power source long since cooled. Maybe it was contained. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it marked the end of something vast and brilliant. Or maybe it was nothing. Maybe it's just a dream we have, born from the longing to believe we are not the first minds to ask these questions. That intelligence has flowered before and vanished, and waits now in isotopic silence. Because these elements do not lie. They count time with painful precision. If something unusual happened, if the Earth flinched, if it pulsed, they will hold the trace. And so we keep measuring, keep listening, keep reading the rocks as though they are journals written in atomic ink. Because if the past holds any voice, it speaks through decay, through ratios, through particles still humming with memory. And if that hum ever grows louder, if the patterns align, what forgotten epoch might we find, recorded not in monuments, but in the quiet mathematics of the Earth itself? And if time remembers this way, what else might it be remembering still? Long before Pangaea broke apart into the scattered lands we now call home, the Earth had already shaped and unshaped itself many times. There were older supercontinents, forgotten giants whose names we barely whisper: Rodinia, Nuna, Kennerland, formed in silence, drifted through ancient oceans, then shattered by the slow breath of the planet. They moved not in centuries, but in eons. They collided with a force deeper than tectonics, rooted in the planet's mantle, driven by the slow churn of molten memory. And with each collision, mountains rose, oceans closed, climates shifted, species were born, and entire landscapes were swallowed into the Earth's crust, buried beneath pressure, heat, and time. But what else was buried with them? Beneath the seams where Rodinia once stretched, beneath the bones of Kennerland now crumpled beneath newer crust, could there lie something more? Something not entirely geological, not mineral, not fossil, but made? We do not fully understand these ancient continents. Their shapes are ghosted from magnetic traces and scattered rock records. No map is complete. No coastline remains. And yet they were real. They were whole. And for hundreds of millions of years, they were the face of the Earth. If a society, any kind of intelligence, existed then, even for a brief shimmer, it would have lived in a world unrecognizable to us. The air was different. The stars arranged another way. The sun younger, cooler. Life was quieter, simpler, at least as far as we know. But we cannot know everything. Could something have emerged, somewhere along a fertile coast of ancient Rodinia? Could thought have bloomed on the fringes of a world we no longer remember, only to be erased not by time alone, but by collision? When continents smash together, they do not merge gently. They crumple, they fold. Ocean basins close. Sediments buckle. Everything caught in between is buried deeper than memory. Cities, if they ever existed, would not be preserved as ruins. They would be transformed, metamorphosed, recrystallized into new stone. Imagine a structure built atop the crust of Kennerland. Then, millions of years later, pulled beneath another plate, heated to over 1,000 degrees, and left in darkness for 500 million years. Nothing would survive unchanged. Not metal, not bone, not even glass. Only trace elements might linger. Only patterns. But what kind of pattern? Could a concentration of rare elements signal something unnatural? Could the alignment of mineral seams reflect not chance, but intention? Could a sliver of isotope tell a story not of geology but of memory? The seams between supercontinents are where we find the oldest rocks. Cratons, shields, Archean bedrock hard as thought. These places are like the knuckles of the planet, worn, tough, unyielding. But they are also archives. Buried deep within them are zircons older than any fossil, minerals formed when the Earth was still cooling. These ancient stones hold the isotopic fingerprints of vanished oceans, vanished atmospheres, and perhaps, just perhaps, vanished cultures. Some scientists have begun to wonder if technosignatures, clues of advanced processes, might be detectable in the deepest crust. Not because we're likely to find skyscrapers or machines, but because technology leaves residue. Even if melted, even if crushed, certain ratios persist. Unusual distributions of metals, traces of synthetic compounds, radiogenic decay that deviates ever so slightly from nature's path. But we seldom look that deep. The Earth's oldest bones lie far below our feet, often beyond reach, locked beneath mountain roots or sunken ocean plates. To study them is to drill into shadow, to read a language broken by time. Still, now and then, fragments rise to the surface, uplifted by tectonic strain, pushed up through fault zones, carried by glaciers. And in these fragments, we sometimes find things we cannot explain, mineral anomalies, structures that defy easy categorization, compositions too precise for randomness. Most are dismissed. Pattern in the rock is just a pattern. Coincidence of formation, play of light. Maybe, maybe not. What we do know is this. The Earth keeps its oldest secrets beneath its feet. And when continents break apart, they often seal their history between them. What if, in one of these ancient collisions, an entire story was buried alive? The supercontinents have no memory that we can hear, but perhaps they remember in silence. Perhaps within the seams of Rodinia lies not just crustal material, but the legacy of something brief and bright, something that rose and fell and was swallowed before we ever learned to listen. And perhaps we've already held a piece of it. Perhaps some mineral in a museum drawer, some curious sample misfiled in a lab, is more than it seems. Perhaps it is a fragment of intention, crystallized by time, mistaken for stone. We do not know what lies beneath the supercontinent's bones. But if something once lived there, something more than microbial, then the clues would not shout. They would whisper. They would hum softly from the Earth's deepest layers, waiting for us to learn how to hear. And if we ever do, what else might we find? Hidden in the next fold of the Earth's slow breath? A fossil is usually a thing we can hold. A bone turned to stone, a shell etched in shale, a leaf pressed into mud, now hard as memory. These are the remnants we expect. Shapes preserved by chance, outlines captured by the patient layers of sediment and silence. But what if thought could fossilize? Not in the way a rib or a tooth does, but in the shape of structure, the rhythm of repetition, the echo of intention. Could consciousness ever leave a mark in the deep fabric of the Earth? Not through tools or monuments, but through something more abstract, and yet more enduring. We tend to believe that only the physical can survive. But ideas, once born, ripple. They ripple through matter, through systems, through design. A mind may vanish, but its decisions, the patterns it chose, the paths it favored, can embed themselves in unexpected places. A city may fall, but its layout lingers in the soil. A tool may rust, but the logic that shaped it can remain, encoded in the geometry of things. So what if, in some ancient time before memory, a form of consciousness, alien not because of space, but because of time, left behind not a body but a pattern? What if thought, in some way, could imprint itself into crystal lattices, into the alignments of atoms under pressure, into the magnetic orientations of rocks, or the symmetry of long-lost molecular arrangements? Not as language, not even as data, but as shape. Some crystals grow in curious ways. They form repeating structures that echo like rhythm. Some align in fractal paths, recursive, self-similar. In rare cases, Scientists have discovered complex quasicrystals that defy natural formation, structures once thought impossible, later recreated in labs under very specific conditions. But what if some were not recreated, but remembered? Could a network of these crystals, hidden in a forgotten seam of the earth, be more than chance? Could it be thought encoded? A memory fossil not of biology, but of logic? It is not so far-fetched. Already we etch information into silicon. Already we store knowledge in magnetic domains and quantum fluctuations. Already our minds stretch beyond the wet boundaries of the brain, into circuits, into language, into the structure of the world itself. Could it be that we are simply repeating an older process, one whose traces we've mistaken for minerals, anomalies, or noise? Some scientists have proposed that information is physical, that it must take form, that it cannot exist without a carrier. If this is true, then ancient thoughts, if they existed, would have needed a medium. And if that medium was durable, stone, crystal, structure, then perhaps some echo of those thoughts still lingers, fossilized not in bone, but in formation. We would not recognize it. We would call it natural. We would call it rare. But we would not call it mind. Not yet. And perhaps that is the greatest barrier. Not that the fossils of thought are too faint to find, but that we don't yet know how to see them. Because thought, like time, does not leave straight lines. Curls. It loops. It emerges in patterns that feel coincidental until they are not. Imagine a valley where the stones are aligned just so, repeating across scales, obeying a symmetry too subtle for randomness. Imagine a field of magnetic nodules, shifting ever so slightly in a way that encodes a signal, too slow for the eye, too patient for the machine. These would be thoughts preserved, ideas suspended not in amber, but in entropy, held together by the shape of their own structure. Or perhaps the fossil of thought is something even simpler. A logic, a principle, a preference embedded in how energy once flowed across the land. The way rivers bent, the way heat dispersed, the way certain forms were favored and others forgotten. The mind that made it is long gone. The hand that shaped it is dust. But the shape remains. The rhythm remains. And somewhere, beneath the layers, the pattern hums, softly, persistently, like a thought still unfolding. And if such fossils exist, they would not be loud. They would not be recognizable. They would not demand our attention. They would wait, because fossilized thought, if it survives at all, does so the way all fossils do, quietly, deeply, and only in places where time forgets to turn the page. And if thought can leave a mark like that, what other traces might be hidden not in form, but in the form beneath the form? And if we learn to read those hidden shapes, what minds might we finally begin to remember? We imagine fossils as ancient, bone turned to stone, the ghost of a tree frozen in ash. But what if the next great fossils are not made of bone or bark, but plastic and silicon? What if the record we leave behind is not a trace of life, but a shadow of technology? And more unsettling still, what if we're not the first to leave such a shadow? If technology once bloomed on this planet long before us, if machines, systems, or engineered structures once rose in an epoch now erased, what strange remains would persist? What would be durable enough to last not just centuries or millennia, but geological ages? A fossil, after all, is simply what survives. To become a fossil is not a matter of importance, but of circumstance. Conditions must be right. Burial must be quick. Oxygen must be scarce. Pressure must be precise. Fossils are not common. They are the lucky accidents of decay. And when we apply this to human creations, buildings, machines, tools, the odds become even narrower. A city built today will not last long. In 10,000 years, steel rusts, glass crumbles, circuits fail. In 1,000,000 years, soil reclaims every tower, vegetation covers every scar. In 10 million, even the deepest foundations dissolve. And yet, what if some things do survive? In the right conditions, plastics persist. Hardened synthetic polymers, buried under the right pressures, could fuse with sediments, forming new rocks, technosedimentary hybrids never before seen in nature. Already we have a name for them: plastiglomerates. Born of waste, destined for the fossil record. Then there is metal. Not in exposed forms, but in hidden places, copper wires inside sealed containers, rare earth elements nestled within once useful machines. Over time, they oxidize, diffuse, or melt, but traces remain. In mineralized form, they become inclusions, odd pockets of composition that defy geologic norms. And perhaps stranger still is glass. Not ordinary glass, but fused silica, vitrified in ways natural processes rarely replicate. We've created it accidentally in nuclear test sites in the intense heat of weapons. These forms of man-made glass may persist for eons, altered but not destroyed. Could a data center, buried and forgotten, become a geological anomaly? Imagine it. Racks of servers, densely packed with layered circuits, silicon wafers, and copper paths. A technological hive humming with information. Now imagine its collapse. The roof caves, dust settles, vegetation grows, centuries pass, the servers decay. But then, an earthquake, a landslide, a slow, generous burial. Down it goes, compressed, sealed, protected by chance. In a million years, it is no longer a building. It is a node in the rock, a pocket of unnatural density, a vein of materials not seen in natural environments. Puzzle. Paradox. One day it may be uncovered. Not by us, but by something else, something curious, something capable of inquiry. And what will it see? Pattern, perhaps. Layers of silicon arranged in unnatural symmetry. Metals gathered in proportions that never occur together. A logic embedded in matter. A design even if the meaning is lost. Because technology is more than tools. It is a form of organization. And organization, especially complex ones, tend to leave signatures. Even when shattered, even when scrambled, the structure whispers of its origin. So we ask, if a civilization before us once reached this level, if it manufactured, built, encoded, where are its technofossils? We haven't found them. Or perhaps we haven't recognized them. Some anomalies in the geological record remain unexplained. Microscopic metal spheres found in Precambrian strata. Ancient formations of unknown alloys. Strange isotopic distributions in rocks too old for contamination. Dismissed. Rejected. Coincidence. Artifact. Natural anomaly. But what if we're misreading the record? What if a pattern only looks random because we lack the perspective to decode it? What if the Earth has already preserved evidence, not as monuments, but as buried anomalies, technofossils waiting in the deep archive of stone? There's a paradox in this idea. If a past civilization advanced far enough to leave technofossils, why haven't we seen them clearly? But if it didn't advance far enough, how could anything remain at all? The answer may be hidden in scale. Civilization, like everything, may be brief. A few million years, long to us, short to geology. If technology rose and fell before the Cambrian, its remains could lie deep within subducted crust, melted beyond recognition. Or perhaps it didn't fall in disaster. Perhaps it chose to fade, to disappear gently, to become indistinguishable from nature. In that case, its legacy would not be skyscrapers or satellites, but anomalies in the periodic table. Misplaced molecules, crystalline structures that hum with forgotten complexity. And maybe we've walked past them, touched them, looked at them under microscopes and saw only stone. Because the Earth forgets, but it forgets imperfectly. Some things slip through. And in those rare, resistant remains, thought might still linger. A whisper of a whisper, pattern mistaken for noise. And if these technofossils exist, what kind of mind left them? What kind of story did they tell? And perhaps more haunting still, what kind of story are we leaving behind? The Earth hums with invisible lines. A slow, magnetic breath that surrounds us, shields us, guides the needle of every compass. But this field is not fixed. It shifts, it wanders, it reverses. And in that wandering, it records. Like tree rings or sediment layers, the Earth's magnetic field leaves a trail. As molten rock cools, iron-bearing minerals align themselves with the field's direction. Locked into stone, they become tiny memory keepers, natural compasses frozen in time. These magnetic signatures, known as paleomagnetism, stretch back hundreds of millions of years. And they are not always as expected. Scattered across ancient strata are anomalies, patches where the magnetic field seems to have behaved strangely. Regions where the alignment is not just shifted, but disturbed, curled, bent, scattered in patterns that defy the smooth logic of Earth's magnetic reversals. Most of these are explained through geology, local disturbances, tectonic compression, the chaotic nature of the planet's molten outer core. But not all are so easily filed away. Some regions show repeated anomalies over time, persistent irregularities in places where nothing else explains them. Could these disruptions be the result of something else? Something not natural but engineered? Because long before a structure crumbles, long before a tool rusts, the metals it used may leave a mark, not in form but in field. Massive concentrations of iron, copper, rare earth elements, assembled, melted, manipulated, can subtly shift the magnetism of a region. Over time, these shifts fade, but sometimes they fossilize. A magnetic echo, a memory of matter shaped with intention. What if an ancient civilization, invisible in stone and silent in fossil, left behind such a field? Not a monument, but a distortion, a magnetic fingerprint buried beneath our feet. We have already altered the Earth's magnetism in our own time, through buried cables, dense cities, and fields of electronics. Future geologists might one day find these distortions in the rocks, puzzled by symmetrical patterns of interference, regularity where none should exist. They might wonder what strange force made these lines, and why they stopped. Now imagine something like that, not from the present but from deep time. What if we've already found it, but misunderstood it? An area where magnetized particles twist in unnatural spirals. A region where iron grains align in impossible harmony. At first glance, such things are dismissed as noise. But if examined more closely, might they be messages? Not in words, not even in symbols, but in order, in repetition, in signal. It's not only magnetism that holds these whispers. Sediment chemistry too reveals disruptions, subtle shifts in trace elements, in isotopic ratios, in the composition of layers that otherwise should follow a predictable path. Sometimes we find heavy metals concentrated in thin bands where no known process placed them. Sometimes the carbon signatures change too abruptly, the oxygen levels spike too cleanly. These may be the echoes of natural events, volcanoes, impacts, blooms of microbial life. But sometimes the sharpness feels unnatural, because intention leaves patterns. Not all of them visible, not all of them physical, but patterns nonetheless. A society that understood metallurgy, magnetism, energy, whatever form its knowledge took, would have changed its environment. And even if every structure it built turned to dust, some of those changes might still be buried in the planet's magnetic memory. We often look for signs of the past in what we can see: a ruin, a tool, a fossil. But perhaps the most persistent traces are those we can only feel: shifts in alignment, dissonance in the field. As though the Earth itself once listened to something else. As though, in a moment long gone, the planet's quiet hum was interrupted by a different song. And if we could learn to read that song, if we could recognize the off-key notes as more than randomness, what might they reveal? Perhaps they are nothing, a glitch in the field, a forgotten fluctuation. Or perhaps they are echoes, left behind by hands long vanished, by minds long dissolved, but preserved in the one medium that flows through every rock, every sea, every breath of wind. The magnetic field does not speak, but it remembers. And if memory can live in the alignment of atoms, if intention can ripple across a planet's invisible currents, then what else might we find, hidden in the next magnetic fold? The sky remembers. Not with words, but with whispers, trapped in ancient ice, preserved in tree rings, caught in the chemistry of soil. The atmosphere carries the breath of ages. Every volcanic eruption, every wildfire, every exhale of life is etched into the delicate balance of gases that surround us. But only recently, before 800 million years ago, the sky falls silent. No records, No ice cores. No preserved air. No rings, no bubbles, no rhythm to read. The atmosphere, like the rocks below it, becomes unreadable. And yet, silence is never empty. It is a shape, a boundary. A silence like this does not suggest nothing happened. It suggests we cannot hear what did. We can trace Earth's atmosphere back to a point, 800 million years, give or take, where things begin to speak. Oxygen levels shift, carbon cycles pulse, and ice begins to whisper. The air traps its first memories in frozen cores, and from there we begin to reconstruct the moods of the planet. But before that threshold, no ice, no signal, just stillness. Geologically, this makes sense. Ice cores don't last forever. Organic markers decay. Trees, as we know them, hadn't yet risen. The world was different, raw, volcanic, hungry. The climate swung between extremes, scorching warmth and freezing silence. Nothing lasted long enough to hold a record. And yet, what if something happened in that silence? What if, in that mute sky, an epoch came and went, unseen, unpreserved, unimagined? We know so little about the conditions of Earth before the Cryogenian period. The pre-800 million year Earth is a canvas of stone and pressure, lacking not only the biological complexity we rely on for records, but also the stable climate systems that preserve them. The sky then was alive, yes, but not in the ways we expect. No trapped air, no measurable methane, no traceable ozone, just a vast openness, rolling with storms we'll never feel, colored with gases we can only guess. And through that sky may have passed things we cannot name. Machines, perhaps, or signals, or something entirely unlike us. And if they came, and if they went, the sky did not keep their story. Because the sky, like the Earth, forgets. But not by malice. By nature. By time. We preserve our own age carefully, whether balloons, satellites, monitors tracing every molecule. We think in data, in storage. But the early Earth did not think this way. It did not archive. It simply changed. And so we stare into this vast, quiet space in the past. A billion years of unrecorded weather. Unrecorded seasons. A sky that did not keep notes. A silence above, paired with a silence below. Could something have lived in this hush? Could something have risen, looked up, and seen that same sky, blue or brown or strange, and wondered, as we do now, if it was alone? Or did something try to alter the sky? We can change our own atmosphere now. Industry, combustion, and war leave chemical fingerprints. Greenhouse gases rise, isotopes shift. Could a similar alteration have once happened long before the tools we know? Could a spike in carbon or a pulse of oxygen have flickered, then vanished, too soon to leave a mark in the cores we now drill? We search for such moments in the rocks, and sometimes we find them. Tiny clues in sulfur isotopes, subtle hints in mineral oxidation. But they are faint, barely there, and never loud enough to say this was intention. Never strong enough to whisper this was a voice. Still, the silence between signals is a kind of message. Tells us what we cannot know. It reminds us of the narrowness of our vision, the limits of what stone and ice and air can keep. We long for a record, a clear, complete, uninterrupted timeline of Earth's breath. But instead we are given gaps. Spaces where stories may have lived and died without ever touching the tools we use to remember. And so we lean into the unknown, not because it comforts, but because it humbles. If the sky forgets, then so will we. And if the silence before 800 million years hides more than we can imagine, then what else might be hidden still, in the atmosphere, the oceans, the air? And if the sky didn't record it, who else might have? Everything falls apart. Not from failure, but from inevitability. This is the quiet law that governs all things, the second law of thermodynamics. Entropy, the soft unraveling of structure, the drift from order to disorder, the slow crumbling of systems into silence. Civilizations are not exempt. They rise with fire, with vision, with the surge of pattern. They build, they expand, they stabilize. And then, gradually, they begin to fray. Not from neglect alone, but from the weight of their own complexity. from the heat of their own engines, from the invisible arithmetic of loss. Entropy is not destruction. It is transformation. It is the fading of information into noise, the soft loss of shape, the return of structure to chaos. And when applied to empires, whether of stone, silicon, or starlight, it becomes a kind of forgetting, a return to stillness. Every empire consumes energy to maintain its boundaries, to hold its shape against the pull of time. Roads must be repaired. Codes must be remembered. Knowledge must be transmitted generation after generation. But nothing is perfectly efficient. Some energy is always lost. Some meaning always slips away. And so collapse is not a moment. It is a process, a thermodynamic whisper, a sigh. We see it in ruins. Not the drama of fire or war, but the erosion of function. Cities where the plumbing failed before the walls did. Scripts no longer understood. Languages that turned to dust on unreading tongues. Now, we ask a deeper question. Could entropy have hidden other empires? Ones that came and went so long ago, their collapse was not just cultural or political, but physical? Could the laws of thermodynamics have already swallowed entire civilizations before ours? So completely that we see only randomness where there was once design. Because entropy does not erase all at once. It distorts. It blurs. A structure under entropy does not vanish, it becomes less structured, less legible. A complex system, when left alone, decays into something simpler, something more like nature, more like noise. And if we encountered such a residue, an artifact degraded beyond function, a city crumbled beyond shape, how would we know it was once alive? Once intentional? Once radiant with mind? We might not. We might see only mineral deposits, unusual concentrations of elements, fragments of design now folded into geology. We might walk across the bones of a vanished complexity and call it coincidence. Entropy ensures that the deeper we look into time, the less we find of intention. The molecules rearrange. The atoms scatter. What once held meaning now blends into the quiet background of the earth. And yet, some signals resist. Some materials, like certain isotopes or synthetic compounds, decay more slowly. They whisper across eons. Not in words, but in imbalance. A spike where there should be smoothness. A residual heat. An unaccounted for ratio. In our own time, we are already leaving behind such signals. Cities full of plastic. Landfills layered with synthetic polymers, artificial dyes, engineered metals. Power plants that alter the local isotopic profile. The glow of industry embedded in soil. These are the techno-signatures of our civilization. But given enough time, even they will blur. What now seems unmistakably artificial may one day be misread as strange geology. A curiosity. An unexplained event. Now imagine that process reversed. Imagine looking backward not thousands or millions of years, but hundreds of millions. Would we know the difference between a natural anomaly and the fossil of a forgotten machine? Or worse, what if entropy has already stripped it of form completely? What if we are seeing the aftermath of collapse, but not recognizing it for what it is? The entropy of empires is not always dramatic. It may not leave monuments, wars, or legends. Sometimes it leaves only chemistry, a soil layer rich in ash, a rare compound trapped in quartz, a slight imbalance in the magnetic field, soft fingerprints, disordered remains, thought without name. And in this, entropy becomes more than a law. It becomes a veil, a threshold past which history becomes unrecoverable. The deeper we go into deep time, the thicker this veil becomes. It is possible, perhaps even likely, that more than once something intelligent lived, rose, and dissolved, leaving behind only what the second law allowed to remain. And we, looking back, find only the silence. Entropy does not care for legacy. It does not honor brilliance or innovation. It breaks everything down into base energy, base matter. And yet, even in entropy, a kind of trace remains. Because to have collapsed, something must have once stood. To have been forgotten, something must have once been known. We search for these thermodynamic whispers in every irregularity. every unexplained gradient, every lingering warmth in the deep record of the earth. We search not just for life, but for afterlife, the echo of systems no longer running, the pattern of energy that once held purpose, now slipping into the long quiet. And if entropy has already swallowed ancient empires, the question is not only what were they, but how would we even know? And if the earth has forgotten them completely, could we one day be forgotten just the same? And if so, what would our last trace be, in the eyes of time? We tend to believe that consciousness lives only in minds, in neurons, in brains, in soft tissue shaped by evolution's hand. We see it as small, contained, fleeting. But what if that's only one kind of awareness? What if intelligence can take other forms, slower, broader, older than thought? What if continents, with all their weight and silence, could think? It sounds impossible at first. Stone is not sentient. Soil does not dream. But systems can become something more than the sum of their parts. And the earth, if nothing else, is a system vast beyond comprehension, dynamic, interconnected, and ancient beyond memory. Tectonic plates drift like slow-moving thoughts. Oceans flow with the rhythm of a sleeping pulse. Volcanoes breathe. Winds remember. Even the rocks, in their chemical shifts, participate in cycles of feedback and renewal. Carbon moves from breath to root to stone. Water circulates through cloud, ice, and magma. And always the continents shift. Could this be a kind of mind? Not in the human sense, not made of neurons, but made of relationship. Made of rhythm. In the deep past, the supercontinents came and went, Rodinia, Gondwana, Pangaea, rising and fragmenting over hundreds of millions of years. Each brought massive change. Mountain chains formed. Climate belts shifted. Oceans opened, then closed. Life responded, exploding in diversity, then shrinking in extinction. The continents were not passive. They shaped the very possibility of thought by controlling where life could grow, how energy could flow, how memory could be preserved. If thought is the processing of information, and if information is simply patterned energy, could a continent across deep time be thought of as a kind of processor? This is not to say continents are conscious in the way you are or I am, but perhaps we've defined consciousness too narrowly. There are forms of awareness that do not resemble our own. Trees communicate through fungal networks. Octopuses think with their arms. Coral reefs respond to the motion of tides, the pull of moons, the chemistry of temperature. What, then, do the continents do? They hold memory not just in fossils but in chemistry, in isotopes, in the arrangement of stone itself. They carry the imprint of impacts, floods, eruptions, and absences. A continent holds the scars of billions of years, and those scars shape what comes next. Memory becomes destiny. In that sense, perhaps a continent does not think as we do, but it remembers. And through that memory it responds. A glacier grinds down a mountain, revealing ancient rock that seeds new life. A subduction zone consumes crust, releasing gases that warm the atmosphere. These are not thoughts exactly, but they are consequences. They are causality shaped by deep histories. If the earth has something like a mind, it is slow, distributed, and nonlinear. And if the continents are its thoughts, then perhaps we are simply one of the latest ideas, an experiment in awareness, sprouted from stone and breath, fragile and flickering. And perhaps we're not the first. Could a previous thought have risen and fallen long before us? A different kind of intelligence, not built in cities but in currents. Not in technology but in temperature. Not in biology but in geology itself. Maybe there was once an era when feedback systems became so finely tuned, so complex, that the planet reached a brief threshold of awareness. Not in the clouds, but in the crust. Not as a being, but as a becoming. And maybe that awareness faded, as systems fell out of balance, as entropy returned the order to flux. Maybe the planet dreams only occasionally, when its cycles align just so. A billion-year thought. A fleeting glimmer of planetary mind. Or maybe it dreams still. Maybe the slow motion of tectonic plates is a form of deep cognition, patterns forming and reforming, testing, sensing, responding. Maybe what we see as inanimate is simply operating on timescales too vast for our perception. We notice only the fastest things. But what of slow thoughts? What of slow dreams? Could the arrangement of continents influence consciousness itself, not just biologically but cosmically? Could the spacing of landmasses, the distribution of minerals, the flow of oceans, be part of a signal not yet recognized? These are questions without answers. But even in asking them, we shift our vision. We begin to see the Earth not as a stage, but as a participant. Not as dead matter, but as layered mind. And if the continents are thinking, however slowly, what are they thinking about? Perhaps they are remembering. Perhaps they are listening. Or perhaps they are waiting for the next pattern to emerge, the next echo to rise, the next idea to form itself from dust and begin again. And if we are one of those ideas, if we are the mind of the Earth, looking back at itself through time, then what do we owe the continents that dreamed us? And what will they dream next when we are gone? The ocean is a keeper of many things. Currents, storms, rhythms older than mountains. But it is also the great eraser. It does not burn like fire, nor crush like stone. It dissolves, softly, constantly, patiently, and in its patience it swallows memory. Land may preserve. Rock layers stack and solidify. Valleys may cradle fossils. Deserts may bury cities. But the ocean moves. It grinds, it sinks, it covers and forgets. What is placed within it does not remain as it was. It dissolves into the chemistry, the pressure, the motion. It becomes part of something too large to remember itself. And yet, how much of Earth's memory has ended there? 70% of the planet's surface lies beneath the ocean. And beneath that water, sediment piles slowly over the millennia. Fine particles, biological remains, volcanic ash, chemical dust. Each layer records a moment, but those records are fragile, disrupted by currents, disturbed by life, subducted into the crust. We often look to the sea for origin stories. Life began here, in warm shallows, in ancient tides. But we rarely think of the sea as an ending, as a final archive, or as a vault that seals itself. If a civilization had ever risen before us and lived close to the ocean, as ours does, would it not have been swallowed the moment it fell? Imagine cities built on coasts that no longer exist, on shelves now sunken by tectonic motion. Roads submerged, materials softened. Technology, if it existed, rendered unrecognizable not by fire or war, but by salt water and time. Metal rusts, wood bloats, circuits short. Over decades they fail. Over centuries they vanish. Over millions of years, they dissolve into sediment, ground into molecules, washed away into currents that circle the globe. And if they disappear not by accident, but by design? What if those who came before understood the ocean's erasure not as a threat, but as a gift? A way to leave no trace. A way to end a chapter of existence with intentional silence. The deepest parts of the ocean, trenches like the Mariana, the Tonga, the Kermadec, are places where the planet consumes itself. Plates dive, carrying sediment, rock, and anything within it down into the mantle. These zones are not just deep, they are final. What enters is never seen again. Could entire epochs, cultures, histories, identities have been drawn into these undersea faults and erased? Not metaphorically, but physically. Thought, buried in salt. Structures, folded into stone. Memory, melted. We try to search the seafloor. We send down lights, probes, sonar. But even now, in the age of data and satellite, most of it remains unmapped. We know the surface of the moon in greater detail than our own ocean floor. And what we do know is incomplete. Sediments shift. Currents disturb. The sea's own life recycles its bed, burrowing, eating, reworking what settles. Time becomes blurred, layered, uneven. The past is not neatly stacked, it is stirred. Could the story of a previous civilization, if it ever existed, be hidden in this stirring? Maybe not in a city or a monument, but in anomalies. Strange ratios of metals, unnatural compounds, patterns in sediment layers that seem too deliberate for nature alone. We've found such patterns in our own time, traces of industrial runoff, microplastics, isotopic signatures from nuclear tests. Already, we are writing our own chapter in the sediment. A thin, artificial thread woven into the ocean's soft history. So what if others did long ago? The ocean wouldn't hold their names. It wouldn't protect their books. But it might preserve shadows, soft, abstract traces of something that once had form. A spike in iron, a seam of carbon, a texture in the clay. But here lies the paradox. To see it, we must know to look. And we do not always know. We interpret the sea's record with eyes trained by the present. We expect nature. We assume accident. We read patterns as weather, layers as time, but rarely as intention. And if we are wrong, if water has quietly buried more than we imagined, if the ocean has been not only a cradle but a crypt, then what kind of story are we missing? The ocean has no memory in the way stone does. Keeps no fossils, no monuments, no bones. And yet, it is the ultimate storyteller. It carries whispers of everything it has touched. Dust from deserts, ash from eruptions, breath from life. It speaks in chemistry, in salinity, in the drift of particles across a dark and shifting floor. And if something once lived there, something aware, something capable, it may have chosen to vanish not through destruction, but through surrender. To let itself be absorbed, broken down, redistributed into the global current, until nothing remained but equilibrium. Not loss, not failure, but peace. And if that's true, if the ocean has swallowed more than we will ever know, then what else waits beneath the waves, dissolved into silence, yet still somehow present in the memory of the water? And how long before we, too, become just another layer beneath the tides? When glaciers move, they do not tiptoe. They scrape, they crush, they sculpt entire continents with a quiet force that ignores the fragile and preserves only what the coldest pressure allows. We often admire the landscapes they leave behind. Valleys, ridges, polished stone. But what we rarely consider is what they erase. Not only in matter, but in meaning. Because glaciers do not just displace rock. They obliterate memory. Over deep time, Earth has passed through countless ice ages. Each one a slow sweep of silence. Ice formed in high latitudes, then surged outward, grinding mountains to powder, dragging soil, forest, bone, and anything else in its path, down into the icy churn. Cities would be no match. Entire ecosystems vanished beneath the weight. And when the ice receded, the record was not simply buried. It was replaced. A clean slate. This is glacial amnesia, the forgetting not of what once existed, but of the fact that anything ever did. The loss is so complete that absence itself becomes invisible. There is no layer, no ruin, no soft echo. Just rock, worn smooth, as if time itself had been polished away. If a civilization ever rose before the great glaciations, before the Pleistocene or the Cryogenian or even earlier, could it have survived the weight of a mile-thick glacier pressing down upon its memory? The answer, softly, is not likely. Steel bends under heat, but under ice it shatters. Concrete, even in its strength, would crack, buckle, be ground down to dust. What could survive would not be structure, but trace, chemical irregularities, disrupted sediment, microscopic shards embedded in the deepest moraines. And even those traces might scatter, washed away in the glacial melt, rearranged into new landscapes. Entire regions of North America, Europe, and Asia were scraped to their ancient bedrock during the last glaciation. Whatever came before it, whatever forests, creatures, cultures, was swept away as if it had never existed. The land that emerged afterward was new, but built on forgetting. And this has happened not once, but many times. Each ice age is a pause, a reset, a memory wipe written in frost. And between them, Earth breathes again, warmer, wetter, more hospitable. But the slate is never the same. What was lost is rarely recovered. What was known is quickly remade. We see the results in the patchwork of fossils, the strange gaps in the geological record, the broken lineages of species that seem to disappear too cleanly. Sometimes the land tells us less about what lived than about what was removed. So what else, we wonder, might have been taken? Could knowledge have lived here once? Long before us? then been ground into ice and salt, washed into oceans, melted into rivers? Could entire cultures, even entire civilizations, have vanished not in war or decay, but in the slow march of glaciers? And if they did, would we know? We found mammoths buried in permafrost, pollen frozen into cores that whisper of long-lost summers. But these are the exceptions, the few that escaped the full violence of ice. Most material does not survive glaciation. It is too soft, too shallow, too fragile. The earth forgets slowly, but glaciers forget with speed. And when they remember, they do so as landscape, nothing more. A fjord, Kettle Lake, a striated cliff where once a plain might have stretched. Some scientists wonder if there are pre-glacial mysteries, features in bedrock or sediment that do not fit the pattern, that hint at disturbance. But such questions are hard to chase, because the record has been erased too thoroughly. You cannot reconstruct what was never preserved. You cannot find a ghost when the house was never built. And so, we are left with a sobering thought, that deep beneath the feet of every ice sheet's path may lie not only stone, but silence. A silence where stories once were. Not stories we can read, not stories we can recover, but stories nonetheless, because knowledge is not immune to the forces of nature. And the intelligence of a species, its memory, its identity, can be as vulnerable to ice as to fire. We build, we record, we hope to be remembered. But glaciers do not listen. They do not care. They pass over all things with equal disregard. And in their passing, time is leveled. And if this is true, if the Earth's great white erasers have moved across the past more times than we know, then how many truths have been taken with them? And more haunting still, what might be taken next? Because even now, the ice returns. Glaciers retreat, yes, but they also come again. Always, eventually, again. The planet breathes in cycles, hot, then cold, then colder still. And each time, more is forgotten. And so we ask not only what the glaciers have buried, but what they are preparing to bury next. There is a silence that doesn't come from absence, but from scale. From size so vast, from time so deep, that the mind cannot hold it. Not really, not fully. We can say the words, 1 billion years, but we don't feel them. Not the way we feel a year or a lifetime. 1 billion years is not something we comprehend. It is something we stand beside, quietly, as though beside a cliff whose bottom we'll never see. And yet the earth is full of such cliffs. Time here stretches like ocean. It does not move like our clocks or calendars. It moves like stone moves, like heat through the mantle, like continents across epochs. We measure our history in generations. Fleeting, brief, full of urgency. But the planet moves in eras, in tectonic size, in extinction and renewal. So when we ask the question, could a civilization have lived and died before us, so long ago that not even dust remains, we must first face the problem of scale. Because 1 billion years is not just more time. It is different time. To us, 10,000 years is ancient. A cave painting, a buried ruin, a fragment of pottery. And already at that range, details blur. Names are lost. Context fades. Now add 0 after 0 until the span stretches 10, 100, 1,000 times beyond that. What could survive such distance? What could remain readable? 1 billion years is enough time for continents to form, split, and reform. Enough time for entire mountain ranges to rise and fall into the sea. Enough time for ice ages to come and go over and over, grinding the surface smooth. It is enough time for every book, every tool, every tower we've ever made to be swallowed, melted, recrystallized, and mistaken for nature. So if a civilization lasted for, say, 1 million years, an unimaginably long run by human standards, it would still be less than a blink on the billion-year scale. A thin film, a trace in a single layer. And if it came before bone, before shells, before the fossil record even began, how would we see it? We probably wouldn't. Not unless we were already looking. Not unless we knew how to look. Because our eyes are tuned to the visible. Our senses are tuned to the immediate. We trust what we can hold, what we can date, what we can place in a story. But deep time doesn't give us stories. It gives us fragments, irregularities, Isotopic whispers. Nothing that says clearly, someone was here, and so we assume no one was. But absence is not always proof. Sometimes it is a symptom of scale. We may be looking for footprints in a river, long after the water has swept them away. We may be searching for voices in a language we never learned. Could a civilization have lived 1 billion years ago, built something vast, and vanished before the next sediment even settled? The answer is not just yes. The answer is we wouldn't know. Not because it didn't happen, but because we are not scaled to see it. Our perception fails at the edges of time. Our logic grows thin. What seems impossible is often just too large, too slow, too distant. We speak of the Anthropocene, the human age, as a unique mark in Earth's history. But how many other scenes might there have been? How many brief illuminations, moments of complexity, of awareness, that came and went too soon or too long ago for us to detect? And if the problem is scale, then we must also wonder, how much are we missing now? Are there patterns we dismiss because they don't fit our frame? Are there anomalies we overlook because we are too near, too small, too bound by our own sense of what matters? Maybe, maybe not. But if a civilization bloomed long ago, it would have been reduced by now to almost nothing. And yet, almost nothing is not nothing. There may still be echoes, buried deep, waiting to be felt, not seen. Waiting for minds not faster, but wider. Minds that can stretch across the scale of geologic memory and ask, what would it look like if it had happened, and we just didn't know how to see it? And if that's possible, then what else might we be blind to right now? The Earth wears its history not in ink, but in scars. Deep gouges where asteroids struck. Jagged mountains where plates collided. Thin, dark lines in rock where life collapsed all at once. These are the marks left behind not just by time but by trauma. We call them natural. Catastrophe is part of the planet's rhythm. Impacts, eruptions, extinctions. But what if these wounds are more than accidents? What if some of them, just some, are the leftover signs of choices, of intention? A scar, after all, is not just damage. It is healing. It is evidence that something broke and then tried to mend. The Earth, in its long life, has broken many times. Whole oceans drained. Skies darkened by ash. Continents torn apart like paper. And each time, something new emerged from the wound. But the question lingers. What caused the breaking? Impact craters are among the oldest visible memories on the planet's surface. We trace them like detectives, measuring their age, their depth, their reach. Some are well-known: Chicxulub, which likely ended the reign of the dinosaurs. Vredefort, Sudbury, Manicouagan. Circular reminders that the cosmos does not always pass quietly. But there are others. Older, deeper, fainter. Their edges eroded, their patterns disrupted. Some almost unrecognizable as craters at all. Could one of them be misread? Could something once have struck the Earth, not by chance but by will? The notion is uncomfortable. We do not like to imagine violence from before we can explain it. And yet, if a civilization ever reached beyond its own world, if it launched machines, probes, or worse, then accidents or decisions may have left a mark. We've already done this ourselves. We've tested weapons powerful enough to alter entire landscapes. We've built machines to smash atoms. We've drilled deep, detonated deeper, left isotopic fingerprints where none existed before. And we've only just begun. Now stretch that capacity back 1 billion years. Imagine a civilization that mastered energy in ways we cannot yet imagine. What kind of mark would it leave? A layer of fallout? A change in global temperature? A ripple in the magnetic field? Or a scar? Some extinction events arrive like a breath, a slow decline, a shift in climate. But others are sudden, brutal, unexplained. Entire branches of life cut off in a moment. And while many can be traced to volcanic activity or impact, some still resist clarity. The Ordovician-Silurian extinction, 443 million years ago. The Devonian, 372 million. The End-Permian, the End-Triassic, each one a scar in the biological record. Were these natural spasms of Earth's metabolism? or something else. Not all scars are violent, of course. Some are slow, tectonic, hidden beneath the pace of human perception. But even these raise questions. The planet's plates drift and crash and slide, reshaping the world again and again. But what if this movement was once influenced, however briefly, by more than geology? What if someone, long ago, understood the crust well enough to alter it? We've done this too on a small scale: fracking, tunneling, mining, changing heat flows, shifting faults. We barely understand the consequences, and we're doing it anyway. If others came before, and if they did the same, on a scale matching their reach, what scars would be left behind? We might see them as rifts, as faults, as collapse. But perhaps they were once infrastructure or defense or energy. Perhaps they were once purposeful, now buried beneath a billion years of forgetting. Of course, this is speculation. And that's the point. Deep time hides intention well. It erases motive. What once was design becomes coincidence. What once was decision becomes geology. The scar remains, but the story is gone. And yet, even so, we can still ask, could some scars on Earth be the remnants of an intelligence not our own? Could they be the legacy of a civilization not erased by time, but rewritten into the land itself? Maybe, maybe not. But if so, the Earth would be the final record, the body that remembers when the mind is long gone. And if that's true, then we must look not only at what's been preserved, but at what's been broken. Not just the fossils, but the fractures. Not just the life, but the losses. Because the scars of the Earth are not just wounds. They are whispers. And if we listen, not for what they are, but for what they might have been, we may begin to hear the softest echoes of something old. Something intentional. Something lost. And then we must ask, if these are the scars we can still see, what scars remain hidden, far deeper, still waiting to be felt? We call them myths: Atlantis, Lemuria, Mu. Lost continents swallowed by sea, ancient societies erased by time. Tales of impossible cities, radiant technologies, and civilizations more advanced than their age should allow. Stories told in fragments, echoed across cultures, surviving in whispers. But what if they're not just stories? What if myth is memory, warped by centuries, softened by metaphor, but rooted in something real? What if what was lost is deeper than we've dared to look? Atlantis, as the Greeks imagined it, was a marvel, an island of knowledge drowned in a single night. Lemuria, born in 19th century science before drifting into legend, was said to stretch across the Indian Ocean, now sunk without a trace. Other tales live in older traditions: Kumari Kandam, sunken lands mentioned in Tamil lore, or the drowned worlds in Aboriginal dreaming. Each one speaks of a place, a fall, a forgetting. These myths are easy to dismiss. We assume they were invented to explain the unexplainable, to fill gaps in knowledge before science could take hold. And in many ways, they are. But there is something peculiar in their consistency. Distant cultures speaking of lost lands. Ancient voices whispering of floods, of collapse, of memory swallowed by earth and sea. Could they be remembering something real? Not necessarily cities with domes and crystals, but epochs, societies, structures that once stood where now there is only ocean or mountain or mantle. Because beneath our feet, the earth holds more than stone. It holds stories, compressed by heat, rearranged by pressure, sealed into the shifting crust like pages in a book no one can read. The upper mantle, flowing ever so slowly beneath the crust, is not a void. It is an archive of transformation. Here, rock becomes liquid, then solid, then something between. And in this movement, the earth remakes itself. Entire plates are drawn downward in subduction zones, continental shelves consumed, sediments carried deep into the planet's memory. What goes in does not return, not intact. And so, if an ancient land, whether mythic or real, was caught in this process, we would not find its ruins. We would not find its artifacts. We would find only trace, altered minerals, displaced chemistry, echoes in the heat. But perhaps that's enough. There are rocks in the mantle older than anything on the surface. Fragments of ancient crust, hidden deep, only revealed when plumes of magma bring them back up. Strange xenoliths. Out-of-place stones with isotopic fingerprints that don't match their surroundings. Clues that something else once existed. Somewhere else. Sometime long ago. Could these be the bones of forgotten continents? Could they be the physical memory of a myth? We have already found sunken continental fragments, Mauritia, beneath the Indian Ocean, and Zealandia, mostly submerged in the Pacific. Neither holds cities. Neither confirms legend. But they show us that land can vanish, not just beneath waves, but beneath the surface of the earth itself. And if land can vanish, so can what lived upon it. So we wonder, if an early civilization, long before ours, long before fossils, long before even vertebrates, rose upon such a land, could its traces now rest in the mantle, twisted beyond recognition? Could myths of lost worlds be echoes of such truths, dimly remembered through oral tradition, refracted by imagination, but anchored in an ancient forgetting? Not all memory is conscious. Some is felt, passed down not in words, but in sensation. Perhaps these stories survive not because they are false, but because they are too old to explain, too fractured to decode, too buried to confirm. And maybe, just maybe, the Earth itself is telling these stories, through patterns in its magnetic field, through inconsistencies in rock formation, through the rare rise of deep mantle minerals that don't quite belong. These are not monuments. They are not artifacts. But they are strange. They are layered. And they are real. We may never know what the mantle remembers. We may never recover the names, the faces, the thoughts of those who might have come before. But we can feel the weight of their absence. We can trace the shape of a loss too large to dismiss entirely. Because myths don't survive by accident. They survive because they touch something deeper than logic. Something ancient. Something half-remembered in the soul of the world. And so, perhaps the tale of Atlantis is not just fantasy. Perhaps Lemuria is not a mistake. Perhaps these myths are the last breath of a memory we can no longer reach. Not because it never existed, but because it sank too deep. Not into water, but into stone, into heat, into the mantle. And if the mantle holds memory, what else might be buried in its folds, still waiting to be stirred, to rise again, in fire or dream? And when it does, will we recognize it? Or will we call it myth once more? Every fire leaves something behind. Not just heat, not just ash, but carbon. A signature, a breath caught in black. From the faintest candle to the hottest reactor, every act of burning writes a mark into the world. It lingers in soot, in chemical traces, in the shifting ratios of air and stone. And the earth, ever patient, records these moments. Not in stories, but in layers. Across its long history, Earth has burned often. Volcanic wildfires, lightning-struck forests, planet-wide infernos from meteor impacts. These are natural. They leave behind char, fragments of plant life seared into the fossil record, thin carbon films pressed between sandstone and shale. When we find these, we name the fire. We name the source. We explain the burn. But what if some of the carbon is different? What if, buried within the familiar record of natural combustion, there are layers born not from trees or storms, but from industry? We already know our own era leaves such a mark. Human activity has changed the very chemistry of the planet. We've spiked the carbon, altered the nitrogen, released synthetic elements and isotopes into the soil, built polymers that resist decay, created compounds the planet never knew until we came. These signals, unmistakable, measurable, will remain long after we are gone. They are our technosignature, our carbon ghosts. But if we can do this, could someone else have done it before us? It's a quiet question, almost invisible beneath the noise of certainty. But some anomalies remain in the record-thin layers of strange carbon, spikes in metallic concentrations, pockets of elevated radiation where no natural cause is clear. We often attribute them to volcanism, to cosmic rays, to coincidence. And maybe they are. But maybe not all of them. If an earlier civilization, chemical, technological, or something stranger, once walked the earth, we would not expect to find their monuments. Not after 1 billion years. But we might find their residue. A carbon layer out of context. An unexplained molecular fragment. The byproducts of combustion no forest could have created. Could we already be misreading such layers? We've seen events like the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, where global temperatures spiked and carbon levels surged. It's widely believed to have been caused by volcanic activity or methane release from ocean clathrates. But what if, in some distant scenario, it was the result of combustion, not from nature but from machines? What if those carbon spikes, those soot layers, those ancient changes in gas ratios are not just geological phenomena, but unrecognized industrial footprints? The ghost of a refinery, the breath of an engine, is not so far-fetched. Already, we struggle to tell the difference between ancient wildfires and modern pollution in ice core records. Already, we see plastics forming new rock, plastiglomerates, along coastlines. If someone had created synthetic materials long before us, and those materials were degraded beyond form, how would we know they were artificial at all? We might not. They would appear as strange deposits, as unusual carbon chains, as out-of-place elements dismissed as measurement errors or rare mineral quirks. They would seem like nature because we would have no reason to believe otherwise. This is the paradox. We search for intelligence in the stars, while perhaps walking daily on the remnants of a forgotten mind. The carbon ghosts do not announce themselves. They do not glow or hum, but they may still be here, in seams of shale, in pockets of coal, in the faint residue of things once burned with purpose. We already know that combustion changes the planet's memory. Fires transform not just matter, but chemistry. They rearrange the story of life and death. And if, long ago, something burned with intent, fueling machines, reshaping matter, unlocking energy, we may not find the machines. But we might find the scars. Not all carbon is alike. Some ratios, some isotopic signatures, carry the fingerprints of industry. And if those prints show up where no fire should have been, no lightning, no volcano, no tree, then we must ask, what burned here? And who lit the match? Because every fire leaves something behind. And if we learn to see the carbon not just as residue, but as record, what other ghosts might rise from the ash? Before the Cambrian explosion, before trilobites scuttled across the sea floor, before sponges filtered ancient waters, before shells hardened and life began to leave skeletons behind, Earth was silent. Or so it seems. We call it the Precambrian, a vast, shadowed stretch of time spanning nearly 4 billion years. It is most of Earth's history, and yet, from it we have almost no voices. No fossils of animals, no shells, no bones, just microbial mats, chemical traces, and the soft, blurred suggestion that something was living here, quietly. We often describe this time as darkness, a world asleep, but perhaps that's the wrong metaphor. Perhaps Earth wasn't sleeping. Perhaps it was simply not recording. Because fossilization is a privilege of form, of bone, of shell, of parts hard enough to resist the slow grind of time. Before such structures evolved, life left almost no trace. Its tissues dissolved. Its bodies vanished. Its thoughts, if any, slipped beneath the radar of geology. So what else might have existed during those long nights? Could something more complex, something intelligent, have emerged and vanished before the Cambrian dawn? Not impossible creatures, but possible ones. Not fantasy, but forgotten fact. A civilization without cities, without steel, without the kind of permanence we now expect of intelligence. We imagine consciousness must build things, that it must carve, etch, write, refine. But what if once it didn't? What if it thought, and then dissolved? A soft civilization, rooted in the sea, made of matter that did not fossilize. Bodies without bones, tools without tools, knowledge carried not in books or stone, but in chemistry, in signals passed through fluid, in bioluminescent pulses, in something organic, ephemeral, untraceable. Sounds strange. But then again, the fossil record begins with a strange silence. It is one of the greatest puzzles in Earth's story. Why did life seem to leap suddenly, around 541 million years ago, into complexity. Why the burst of forms, of structures, of limbs and eyes? It seems abrupt. But what if it only seems so because what came before left no footprint? What if the Cambrian explosion was not a beginning, but a rebuilding, a recovery? Could an intelligent order have risen and passed entirely within the softness of the Precambrian world, never touching stone, never preserving itself, never meaning to? We have no evidence. But we also have no record. The rocks of this time are old, twisted, pressured, broken by tectonics and buried beneath younger crust. They whisper chemistry but not shape. They hint but do not show. And in this silence, imagination becomes a kind of tool, not to fabricate but to frame new questions. If intelligence is the capacity to respond to complexity, to model the world, to reshape behavior through memory and prediction, then why must it always look like us? Why must it always leave a monument? Perhaps it was once enough to be aware, in forms we cannot recognize, across scales we cannot feel. The Precambrian Earth was alien. Oceans without fish, skies without birds, continents barren and raw. But it was not lifeless. Microbial colonies covered rocks. Stromatolites layered the shallows. Life pulsed, unseen, in every tide. Could consciousness have emerged here, just once? Could evolution have stumbled upon thought before bones, before speech, before history? And if it did, how would we ever know? We might be standing on its remnants without realizing. The deep crust holds secrets we haven't touched. The isotopic ratios in ancient minerals sometimes defy explanation. Carbon signatures exist that suggest complexity, though not form. We interpret them cautiously with skepticism, and rightly so. But what if one of those anomalies is more than chemistry? What if one spike, one deviation, one quiet curve in the graph is the breath of a world that once thought and then dissolved back into seafoam? There's a humility in the silence of Precambrian nights, a reminder that the absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence, but the echo of something we've not yet learned how to see. And so we listen to that silence, not with expectation, but with awe, not to fill it with stories, but to understand what kind of stories are even possible. Because if something lived before the Cambrian light, something that felt and learned and chose, then it may still be here, in form too scattered to name, too delicate to hold. And if the earth was once awake in the dark, what dreams might it still be dreaming, even now, in the folds beneath the rock, in the chemistry of forgotten oceans? And what would it mean if intelligence is not a miracle, but a rhythm, rising and fading like tides, always returning, always beginning again from silence? We are taught to see history as a line, a beginning, a middle, and an upward arc. From the primitive to the complex, from the past to the present, from ignorance to knowledge. But perhaps this, too, is a story we tell ourselves to make the world feel knowable. Perhaps time is not a road, but a rhythm. Not a line, but a loop. What if history repeats, not precisely but patterned, like seasons, like tides, like breath? What if we are not moving forward at all, but returning? We like to believe we are the first to think the thoughts we think, that every invention is new, every breakthrough a first. But buried within our myths, our instincts, our architecture and science, are curious echoes, shapes that feel remembered rather than discovered, concepts that seem older than we are. A spiral staircase mimics the structure of galaxies. A neural network mirrors the mycelium beneath the forest floor. Ancient texts speak of machines, of lights in the sky, of cities now lost beneath desert or sea. Are these merely metaphors? Or are they fragments of something real, something that once was and will be again? If intelligence has risen before, if minds, technologies, systems have bloomed and withered long before our own, then we may not be the beginning of anything. We may be part of a cycle. One turn in a long spiral of rising awareness, collapse, and return. Entropy guarantees that every structure will eventually dissolve. But it does not say what will rise after. It does not forbid the repetition of form. And the earth, in its long memory, seems to echo with recurrence. Patterns of extinction and recovery. Climate cycles that pulse over millions of years. civilizations that rise, falter, and fade, leaving behind ruins that speak more of rebirth than of finality. Even our understanding of time is changing. Physics suggests that time may not flow as we experience it, that past, present, and future might be more entangled than we imagine, that causality itself may not always move in one direction. Could it be that awareness, too, follows such curves? Could there be buried beneath the sediment of our world not only lost objects, but lost paths, intellectual trajectories once explored, then forgotten, then rediscovered by minds that believe themselves pioneers? Perhaps we are not uncovering new truths, but remembering old ones. This would explain the sense of déjà vu that sometimes haunts our advances. The way discoveries arrive in multiple places at once. The way mathematics describes both the spiral of a galaxy and the shell of a snail. The way ancient ruins seem to echo modern forms. Right angles, solar alignments, knowledge of star paths that should have been unknowable. Is it chance? Convergent evolution of thought? Or is it memory? Not personal memory, but something deeper. Planetary memory. A resonance between civilizations spaced too far apart in time to know one another, yet tracing the same arcs because the conditions allow for nothing else. The spiral moves outward, but its shape returns. History may not repeat in content, but in structure. Not the same kings or wars or empires, but the same rise, the same reach, the same forgetting. And maybe, every so often, a civilization reaches the edge of its own arc, sees beyond the illusion of firsts, begins to suspect that what it has called invention is actually rediscovery, that what it names progress is just another return. Maybe we are arriving at that edge now. And if we are, if the pattern is visible, what choices does it offer? Do we spiral toward collapse again? Or do we learn to step off the wheel? Because if history is a spiral, then somewhere beneath our feet lies the layer where it once passed before. And somewhere above us, another ring is waiting to form. And in between, a moment, a pause, a breath, a chance to listen to the echoes not as ghosts, but as guides. And if we are not the first to reach this point, then who was? And what did they choose? Beneath our continents lie their roots. Not the shifting plates, not the recent sediments or surface folds, but something far deeper, older, colder. Cratons. These ancient blocks of Earth's crust have endured for billions of years, resisting the heat of the mantle, untouched by subduction, unbroken by time. They are the Earth's memory stones, the original scaffolding upon which all younger geology rests. Hard, stable, unmoving. If anything from deep time could survive, truly survive, it would be here. Cratons are found beneath the heartlands of continents. The Canadian Shield, the Baltic Shield, the Pilbara and Kopval in Australia and South Africa. Their rocks, granites, gneisses, greenstones, are the oldest we know. Some are over 4 billion years old, nearly as old as the planet itself. They have watched the birth and death of oceans. They have stood through every supercontinent cycle. Rodinia, Nuna, Kennerland, Gondwana, Pangaea. They have seen the Cambrian light and the Precambrian dark. And still they remain, like the bones of a dream too ancient to interpret. But what might they still be holding? The surface forgets. Erosion washes away stories. Subduction consumes them. But cratons are different. They are deep, they are protected, they are still. Their interiors have been insulated from the heat and motion that erase so much. So if a civilization existed long ago, so long ago it predates bone and shell, so long ago even the continents were shaped differently, its traces would almost certainly be lost. Except, perhaps, in the cratons. Because within these ancient slabs of rock lie pockets, fossilized hydrothermal systems, old fluid pathways, mineral seams laid down in environments that have not changed in over 2 billion years. What if, just once, intelligence rose somewhere atop one of these proto-continents? Not necessarily like us, not necessarily in cities, but conscious, creative, capable of shaping its world. What would it leave behind? And could anything of it remain? Not monuments, those would never last. Not tools, not in their form. But what about anomalies? Microscopic patterns in mineral growth. Artificial concentrations of rare elements. isotopic imbalances that do not match known processes, structures of order where none should be. We've already seen strange things in cratonic rocks, zircons with complex inclusions, mineral textures that seem too regular, too precise, always explained away by temperature, pressure, coincidence. But what if not all of them are? If intelligence once walked across a young craton, perhaps before it had even joined a continent, its traces would now be trapped beneath miles of sediment and stone. Deep drill cores might skim the edges of this hidden archive. A few may have already pulled up slivers of this unknowable past. Samples shelved in dusty cabinets, labeled, tested, and quietly set aside as outliers. Because cratons do not offer easy answers. They are quiet, resistant. Their rocks speak in isotopes and silicates, not in artifacts. But they also do not lie. They hold what they have seen. And if we could learn to ask the right questions, if we knew how to read not just form, but pattern, not just chemistry but intention, might we finally glimpse a layer of history no human has ever known? We are so used to looking up for signs of life, toward the stars, the sky, the signals. But maybe the oldest signals are down, buried in the stillness of the Earth's oldest stones, beneath deserts, beneath forests, beneath layers of time we haven't yet learned to feel. There's something humbling in the thought that the Earth may already be holding what we seek, not in ruins, but in roots. The cratons are not only the oldest parts of the planet, they are also the most difficult to access. Some lie beneath kilometers of newer rock. Others are fractured, melted, pressed into new shapes by deep time's tectonic dreams. But in the most stable zones, in the coldest, quietest centers, there may be regions untouched since before complex life began. Imagine that. A pocket of Earth completely isolated for 2 billion years. A geological time capsule. If anything artificial, no matter how small, had been sealed within it, would it not still be there? Waiting. Or perhaps we've already found it, and didn't know what it was. Perhaps a crystal inclusion once dismissed as anomalous was actually an engineered fragment, long degraded, now only recognizable by its refusal to be random. Or perhaps it's still hidden, deep in the roots of the world, wrapped in silence, too far for drills, too strange for our current eyes. Either way, the cratons endure. They are the bedrock of memory, the last pages of a vanished book. If something lived before us, truly before, its final traces might not lie in the stars, or the oceans, or the myths. They might lie here, buried, waiting. And if that's true, what kind of patience does it take to hear them? What kind of science or silence do we need to learn to listen to the deepest part of the Earth's forgotten mind? We think we understand what a machine looks like. Cogs, wires, pistons, the ticking of gears, the movement of hands around a numbered face. Machines, we tell ourselves, are mechanical, temporal, tangible, brief. But not all machines tick. Some hum, some drift, some measure not seconds but stars. And some, perhaps, are buried so deep in the rhythms of the Earth that we no longer recognize them as machines at all. What if there are clocks that do not count hours, but eons? Not made of metal but of gravity and crystal. Not visible, but embedded in the folds of matter itself. Designed not to last centuries but billions of years. Not to ring or signal but to wait. What would such a machine look like? Perhaps it is a pattern of minerals arranged just so. A resonant lattice buried beneath layers of stone. Perhaps it is a self-sustaining loop of magnetic fields, subtly altering a region's geology. Perhaps it is a sequence of isotopes engineered to decay in rhythms that mark deep time, not for others, but for itself. A billion-year machine would not require recognition. It would not care for watchers. It would function silently, measuring, recording, holding shape against entropy's slow unraveling. And perhaps it was never meant to be found. We already know that matter can hold memory, that quartz can vibrate in precise frequencies, that gravitational waves can pass invisibly through space, shifting atoms by fractions smaller than light itself. The universe is not quiet. It is full of structure, of oscillation, of invisible math. So what if a long-vanished intelligence, one far older than ours, once built machines within these invisible patterns? Machines not to build, but to endure. Machines that are not engines but ideas. Not made to do but to be. And if they exist, they may still be here. We already walk across strange anomalies in the Earth. Gravitational oddities, unexplained magnetic zones, rock formations whose precision we attribute to accident. But not all order is natural. Sometimes it is placed. And so we ask, softly, what if some of these anomalies are machines? Not in the sense we expect, but in a deeper, slower rhythm. Instruments built to resonate with the planet's magnetic field. Arrays buried in ancient crystal basins. Signals encoded in the alignment of fault lines, or the spacing of mineral deposits, or the harmonic trembling of the Earth's crust. We have already created machines that use the spin of electrons, the vibration of atoms, the flow of heat. We measure time with cesium, with hydrogen masers, with optical lattice clocks. Our most precise instruments are barely touched by wear. But even they are young, decades old, maybe a century. Imagine something built to last 1,000,000 times longer. Not for communication, but for presence. Not to be known, but to persist. Perhaps such a machine would not even appear artificial. Perhaps it would be dismissed as geology. An oddly regular seam. A rhythmic pulse in seismic noise. A crystal whose growth pattern doesn't match its surroundings. We would not know what to call it. We might not even know it was there. But maybe, just maybe, it was designed for that very reason. To pass unseen. To run undisturbed. To wait for something not yet returned. What if such clocks were left? Not as messages but as anchors, holding time open, holding memory in place. Not for us, but for the planet. A way for the Earth to remember that thought once happened here. That purpose once moved through its stone. If such clocks exist, they are not ticking in our sense of time. They are not measuring days or even years. They are marking conditions, thresholds, changes in atmosphere, in radiation, in magnetism. Waiting for a signal to reach them, not from above but from within. Perhaps we are not meant to discover them until we have changed the Earth enough to activate them. Or perhaps they've already activated. Quietly. In a laboratory someone dismissed. In a mine someone walked past. In a sample drawer, marked inconclusive. Because clocks older than time would not announce themselves. They would simply continue. They would be. And perhaps we will never know who made them. Or why. Or if they were even made. Perhaps they are artifacts of an intelligence that understood time differently. Saw it not as a flow but as a structure. Not as a line, but as a sculpture carved into the fabric of matter. And perhaps they are not machines at all. Perhaps they are thoughts, fossilized into stone, waiting not to move but to be understood. And if we find one, truly find it, will we recognize what we've touched? Or will we, in awe, realize that the machine has been watching us the whole time? And if so, what has it seen? We search the skies for signs of life. We scan the heavens for whispers, radio pulses, laser flashes, repeating anomalies in the cosmic dark. We've built entire fields of science around the dream of contact. But what if the signal we're waiting for didn't come from another world, but from this one? What if the strangest transmissions aren't alien at all, but ancestral? Not messages sent to us, but messages left behind. The cosmos is full of puzzles. Fast radio bursts, brief, intense flashes of radio waves from distant galaxies. Appear without warning, repeating or singular, unexplained. Pulsars spin with clockwork precision, but some stutter without cause. Deep in space, the cosmic microwave background flickers with faint asymmetries we don't fully understand. And then there are the signals that come not from stars but from here, Earth-based anomalies. Strange isotopic ratios, chemical fingerprints in ancient rock that resist simple interpretation, unexplained concentrations of elements in sediment cores, microstructures in crystals that suggest heat, refined, focused, purposeful. We often explain them as natural, volcanic, cosmic, chemical, and perhaps they are. But perhaps some of these disturbances are not accidents. Perhaps some are leftovers, not from a species distant in space but distant in time. What if a civilization once lived here, long before our own, and tried, however subtly, to speak. Not to others, but to itself. To the future. To us. We often assume such a civilization would have built monuments, left ruins, erected pyramids that pierced the sky. But time is not kind to stone. Entropy is not kind to legacy. And so perhaps they chose a different kind of archive, not of matter but of signal. What if they encoded messages into radiation? Into isotopic shifts we would only discover once we reached a certain level of precision. What if they crafted structures in the atmosphere, in magnetic fields, in gravitational noise, too faint to notice until we became capable of asking questions they already knew how to answer? Could a repeating radio burst, detected by a telescope, be an echo not from another galaxy, but from an Earth-based transmission, bent, scattered, delayed across space-time, only now circling back? Could a mysterious isotope, embedded in billion-year-old crust, be a record of energy manipulation too advanced for us to yet decode? We have already created such signatures ourselves. Nuclear detonations leave long-lived isotopes. Our power plants alter local geochemistry. Our satellites broadcast in frequencies that will drift through space long after we're gone. We've even designed messages to the future. Warning signs etched in engineered stone, intended to be understood 10,000 years from now by whoever, or whatever, might find them. But what if someone else tried that 10 million years ago? 100 million? Longer? Could their version of a broadcast be buried not in the stars, but in the pattern of particles? Encoded geometry? In structured randomness? Perhaps they didn't speak with language. Perhaps they spoke in harmonics. Perhaps the alignment of certain minerals, or the spacing of certain isotopes, or the timing of rare geological events was not coincidence but intentional placement. Not to control but to preserve. Maybe what we call geological anomaly is actually a form of syntax. Maybe what we read as noise is a signal we never learned to hear. And maybe we've already touched it. Some scientists have noted unexplained isotopic shifts in ancient zircon crystals. Others have found localized radiation that defies nearby natural causes. There are patterns in the deep-time rock record that feel almost artificial, too precise, too sudden. Not proof, but disturbance. A fingerprint. Faint. So we ask, what if a message is here, right now, all around us? Not in the way we expected. Not carved or written or transmitted, but encoded in the Earth's chemistry, in the atmosphere, in background radiation. A form of communication designed not to be immediate, but to be eventually visible. A message meant to emerge only when we were ready to see it. If so, what kind of intelligence would do that? Not one seeking attention, not one needing recognition, but one that understood time not as distance but as density, something to be folded into signal, to be preserved in form invisible to all but the patient. We don't know if such signals exist, but we do know this: the Earth is full of unexplained data, full of signals we haven't fully decoded. And the deeper we look into space, into stone, into the particles that make up the world, the more we find patterns that feel just out of reach, just complex enough to unsettle, just structured enough to wonder. Could it be that a civilization, long forgotten, long buried, found a way to speak through the planet itself? Not loudly, not with urgency, but with endurance. A signal not shouted, but planted. And if we are only now learning how to hear it, what exactly is it trying to say? And more haunting still, what else has it said that we haven't yet heard? We often imagine intelligence as singular, centered in a brain, housed in a skull, standing upright and alone. We imagine minds like ours, separate, contained, distinct. But the Earth has always offered another model, one quieter, older, and far more entangled. Symbiosis. In the forest, in the sea, beneath the soil, intelligence may not arise in individuals but in networks, in cooperation, in relationship. What if ancient intelligence was never centralized at all? What if it lived, thought, responded not through cities or machines but through connection? Fungi weave beneath our forests, forming mycelial networks that stretch for miles, linking root to root, tree to tree. They transmit nutrients, warnings, even what we might call information. Coral reefs, too, pulse with coordinated behavior, the product of thousands of species living as one. Slime molds, lacking brains, still find the shortest path through a maze. This is not the intelligence of architecture, of industry. This is the intelligence of symbiosis. Now imagine such an intelligence scaled up, not rooted in one organism, but distributed across many. Not housed in buildings, but in ecosystems. What would it look like? And more importantly, what would it leave behind? Perhaps nothing that we would recognize. No monuments, no metal, no ruins, no bones shaped by tools, only a changed environment. A forest arranged just so, a mineral pattern nudged into balance, a subtle reshaping of chemical cycles too smooth to seem unnatural. We might walk through the remnants of such intelligence and call it nature. We might observe its effects and call them climate or coincidence or the rhythm of evolution. But what if, long ago, such a mind existed? Not a civilization in our sense, but a coordinated, distributed awareness. A planetary network, composed not of individuals, but of systems, biotic, chemical, even geologic. A mind that grew not upward, but outward. And what if it thought differently? Slowly, patiently, not in hours, but in centuries. Not in words, but in responses. The way a reef builds itself, or a forest recovers, or the ocean breathes carbon in and out with the seasons. Would we recognize such thought? Would we know when we were standing inside it? Or would we call it background? Baseline? Biology. Perhaps ancient intelligence was once soft and quiet, woven into the world, not separated from it. Perhaps it emerged not once, but many times, in forms we've overlooked because they do not mirror our own. And perhaps it left its signals not in stone, but in balance. Could the Earth's great oxygenation event billions of years ago have been guided? Could the layering of microbial mats, the rhythm of biogeochemical cycles, have been part of something more coordinated than we thought? Not accidental, but aware? There is a haunting symmetry in how life shapes the planet and is shaped by it. Trees breathe out what we breathe in. The mycelial web maps terrain, responds to stress, reallocates resources with uncanny precision. Coral reefs repair themselves with strategies eerily efficient. Is this not a form of cognition? And if such cognition once bloomed, truly bloomed, what remains? Maybe nothing more than anomalies in ancient soil. Slightly elevated trace elements, perfectly tuned ratios, regions where life seemed unusually efficient, unusually adaptive, unusually organized. We already know some of Earth's oldest formations, like banded iron and stromatolites, are built by microbial communities. What if, somewhere, the pattern became more than survival? What if it reached awareness, just briefly, then folded back into the planet? It may not have wanted to be remembered. Or it may not have had the concept of memory at all. It would have no ego, no individual identity. Its thoughts would be currents. Its plans, climate. Its memory, the slow accumulation of adaptation, feedback, and transformation. And if it ended, it would leave no ruins. Only resonance. Only a ghost of coherence. Hidden in the chemistry of rock, the alignment of ancient growth, the calm logic of cycles that shouldn't have been so stable. So we must ask ourselves, are we truly the first intelligence? Or merely the first to carve into stone? What if intelligence doesn't always leave behind objects, but conditions? What if the Earth's past is full of minds we never knew to look for? And if that's true, then perhaps the intelligence of the past is not lost, but still here, woven into soil, into sea, into the quiet relationships that sustain all life. Not gone, just waiting. And maybe one day we will learn to hear the signal not in data but in relationship. Not in transmission but in trust. And then we will see we were never alone. We were never first. We were simply next. We assume that forgetting is failure. That to vanish is to be erased. That memory, to matter, must be preserved in stone, metal, message. But what if forgetting was the plan? What if a civilization long ago didn't collapse by accident but stepped away by design? What if decay wasn't the end of their story, but the shape of it? All across our world, we find traces of balance. structures that fall with grace, cycles that unwind without violence, systems that dissolve into their surroundings without leaving harm. We call these patterns natural, but perhaps some of them were cultivated. Perhaps entropy itself was chosen, not as destruction, but as completion. Imagine a society that understood the deep mathematics of time, not just in calendars and clocks, but in thermodynamics, in planetary cycles, in the quiet laws of entropy. Imagine they saw that all things built must break, all forms must fade, and instead of fighting this truth, they embraced it. Not with despair, but with artistry. What would it mean to engineer disappearance? Not to avoid legacy, but to let it slip softly into nature's rhythm. To create artifacts meant not to last, but to unmake themselves gently, becoming soil, becoming water, becoming silence. A philosophy of leaving nothing behind, except equilibrium. We already touched this idea in fleeting ways: biodegradable plastics, green architecture, regenerative farming. But these are early thoughts, experiments. What if such a mindset had matured across millennia? What if it became the foundation of a civilization's values? Would they build towers? Or forests? Would they store knowledge in servers? Or in cells? Would their monuments be visible or invisible? We often look for the past in stone. But what if they built in material designed to disappear? Organic composites, responsive fibers, biosynced structures that knew how and when to dissolve. Not because they were weak, but because they were wise. We build for permanence, but they might have built for return. To the earth, to silence, to balance. Perhaps that is why we find no trace. Not because they failed to leave one, but because their traces were never meant to last. Could this be why some regions are strangely untouched? Why ancient soil layers show no debris, no soot, no scars of collapse, only continuity? Could the smoothness of some transitions, the quiet of certain sediments, be not absence but design? We might never know, but that, too, could have been the intent. A society that chooses to vanish must know that it cannot be remembered. And still it vanishes, not in fear, not in ruin, but with care, like a symphony ending on a single note, then fading into dusk. What kind of mind chooses that? Not one obsessed with monument, not one driven by conquest, but one attuned to harmony, to dissolution, to the long flow of energy through form and back again. Perhaps they saw legacy not as preservation, but as release. Perhaps their greatest achievement was not what they left behind, but what they didn't. No poison in the soil, no noise in the sky, no wounds in the earth's crust, just entropy and elegance, decay shaped by will. We often speak of sustainability as survival. But what if once it was something higher? A path not just to persist, but to complete the arc of a civilization with beauty. Perhaps we will reach that place ourselves. Perhaps the true apex of intelligence is not the ability to build endlessly, but to leave well, to step back into silence so perfectly that the world doesn't notice we've gone. So maybe the past doesn't speak because it was designed not to. Maybe the silence is not absence. Maybe it is grace. And if so, what might it teach us about how to live and even more about how to let go? Sometimes the most extraordinary discoveries are not missed because they are hidden, but because they are misunderstood, because they look too ordinary, because they don't announce themselves with fanfare or clarity. What if the proof we seek, the trace of a forgotten intelligence, a vanished civilization, a deep time awareness, has already been found, touched, catalogued, labeled, and filed away under the wrong name? What if we held the artifact and called it a rock? All across the world, in universities and research facilities, drawers and shelves overflow with specimens, geological samples, anomalous patterns, strange formations that resist tidy classification, mineral oddities, structural inconsistencies, fossils that almost but not quite make sense. Some are logged as curiosities. Others are quietly set aside. Some are retested over decades, yielding the same confounding results. A few make it into journals, then disappear beneath the weight of more plausible explanations. But what if some of them aren't natural at all? What if, buried within that overwhelming archive, is a message? Not a sentence, not a symbol, but a form, a structure, a resonance, something encoded in symmetry or composition or unlikely alignment. Something too subtle to shout, but too precise to be coincidence. A shape that never occurs in nature, but looks natural enough. A sequence that seems random until it's read in another dimension. Could we already be holding such a thing? We think of discovery as revelation, a moment of clarity, of sudden understanding. But the truth is often slower, murkier, more fragile. It depends on context, on assumptions, on whether we're prepared to see what's in front of us. And our assumptions are strong. We assume ancient intelligence would leave ruins, cities, metal, plastic. But what if it left patterns instead? Artifacts designed not for recognition, but for survival. Not to be found, but to endure. Think of a machine buried for 1 billion years. Its form long since crushed, melted, reshaped. But one piece remains, a microstructure within a mineral, a crystallized echo of information. Is found, polished, sliced thin, placed under a microscope, and then dismissed. Too strange, too perfect, too out of place. Labeled mineral anomaly. Stored, forgotten. We look for signals in the stars. But do we look with equal reverence at the things we've already found here? The problem is not absence. It is meaning. We only see what we're trained to see. A geologist sees mineralogy. A chemist sees composition. A paleontologist sees evolution. But no one looks for intention inside a stone. No one asks, could this be a message? Could this sequence of elements, this ratio, this curve, this magnetic alignment be artificial? Could this artifact not be an accident of pressure and heat, but a deliberate arrangement? The truth is, we don't know what we're looking for. We imagine signs of life in familiar shapes, architecture, tools, scripts. But a civilization of different form, different logic, different matter, might leave behind something we have no category for. A logic crystal, a stabilized isotope chain, a fossil of computation, a fragment of order embedded in chaos. And in 1 billion years, it would not look alien. It would look geologic. Perhaps that's the point. Perhaps a long-gone intelligence didn't want to be remembered in words, but in structure. Not in monuments, but in questions. And we may have already found them. In a lab drawer. On a shelf. In a rock sample once tested, once held, once shrugged at. There is something strangely haunting about this possibility, that the message has already been delivered, and we missed it. Not because we weren't smart enough, but because we weren't quiet enough, open enough, curious enough to see through the veil of the ordinary. And now it waits. The artifact, the pattern, the clue, waiting not to be uncovered, but to be reinterpreted. Because the truth might not lie in the next excavation, but in a rereading of the past. A second glance at what we thought we knew. A new kind of question applied to an old piece of matter. And maybe the message isn't grand. Maybe it's just this, we were here. Or maybe it's a mirror. A gentle echo meant to nudge us, not to prove anything, but to remind us that intelligence has walked this world before, and might walk it again. And if so, if we've already touched that echo, already held it in our hands, then what else might be near us now, quietly waiting to be seen, not as stone, but as story? We often think memory requires a mind. That to remember, something must be alive. Must have neurons, networks, gray matter curled inside bone. But what if memory is not bound to biology at all? What if it is a pattern, not a process? A shape, not a spark? What if thought can echo in stone? Crystals already remember. They hold their form with precision, each atom placed with exquisite repetition, each edge cut by laws of balance and pressure. Quartz vibrates when charged, marking time in the heart of our watches. Data is stored in silica, read and written by light. Even the Earth keeps time through resonance, cycles of heat and orbit, rhythms of magnetism and spin. Patterns in the crust tell stories older than life, older than air. If we can read these stories now, what else might they contain? Could memory, true memory, be embedded not in tissue, but in structure? Imagine a civilization that did not rely on text or sound to carry thought. One that understood how to encode information into the very geometry of matter. A people, or perhaps a network, that saw thought not as words or images but as arrangement. A logic of angles. A syntax of spacing. Instead of carving symbols, they tuned crystals. Instead of ink, they used symmetry. Their archives would be silent, smooth, unmarked to the eye but within coherent. Data held not in code, but in form. To us, it would look like a mineral. To them, it might have been a library. We've seen hints of this already. Experiments have shown that information can be stored in crystal lattices, written into atomic imperfections, or encoded into vibration patterns that resonate over time. These methods can endure longer than any book, outlasting magnetic tape, hard drives, even DNA. So if someone long before us had reached such an understanding, had shaped matter to hold memory without decay, could we find it now? Could we hold it, touch it, and never realize what it is? Perhaps we already have. Perhaps the memory of an ancient intelligence lies inside a crystal labeled anomalous and shelved in a geology lab. Perhaps it waits inside the ordered chaos of a rock whose atomic symmetry hums just a little too perfectly. Not designed to be read with eyes, but with resonance, with light, with silence. And what would such memory feel like? Not language, not image, but recognition. A pulse, pattern, a structure that echoes across scales, atomic to planetary. A form that aligns something in us, even if we cannot say why. Some researchers have wondered why certain shapes seem to recur in nature and culture. Spirals, hexagons, golden ratios. They appear in galaxies and shells, hurricanes and human design. Could it be that memory, when untethered from biology, prefers certain forms? Could these repeating shapes be more than aesthetics? Could they be remnants? What if thought leaves ripples like dropped pebbles in spacetime, and some of those ripples crystallize? Not by accident, by intent. We have always imagined intelligence as fleeting like fire. But what if the deepest intelligence is cold, slow, patient, built not to speak quickly, but to last? There may be stones that pulse with stored resonance. Tiny shifts in atomic lattice that encode long-decayed thoughts. There may be entire mineral seams shaped by old intelligence, waiting not to be deciphered, but felt. We know that vibration can influence matter. Sound can align grains. Light can sculpt form. Even thought, measurable in fields and waves, can move through material in subtle ways. So what if a civilization learned to shape its ideas not into stories, but into crystal fields? If we stand near such a thing, would we feel it? Would it feel familiar? Memory, after all, is not about data. It is about return, coming back, a recognition of pattern. What if there are patterns beneath our feet that are not just natural but intentional? What if we've been walking on thoughts for centuries, never knowing? It changes the way we see the earth, not as inert but as cognitive. Not as storage but as mind. Not alive, but alive with memory. And if so, then the final echoes of a forgotten intelligence may not be in fossils or ruins or skyward signals, but in quartz, in silence, in the geometry of something we've mistaken for mineral. And the question becomes not whether they tried to be remembered, but whether we are finally ready to recognize what they left behind. And if we are, what other thoughts might still be sleeping in stone, waiting to be heard without a voice, waiting to return through rhythm alone? The earth is not silent. Creaks, it groans, it breathes in slow cycles too vast for us to hear. And as we peel back its layers, one core sample, one fossil, one mineral at a time, it speaks in patterns. But for every answer it offers, there is another question waiting just beneath. We ask, when did this rock form? The earth replies. We ask, what caused this extinction? It murmurs in ash and soot. We ask, where did life begin? It gestures softly to a microbial mat fossilized in shallow shale. And yet, with every discovery, the mystery only deepens. Because beneath all our data, beneath the isotopes and sediment maps and decay rates, something stirs, something quieter, something unspoken. It is a question that does not come from us, but from the ground itself. A question that feels less like an idea and more like a presence. Who came before you? We hear it not as words, but as weight. In the way the strata stack without interruption, as if something is missing. In the sudden silences in the rock record, in the smoothness where we expected scars. In the odd formations that seem too regular, too balanced, too unwilling to explain themselves. The ground holds memory, but only loosely. Time wears it down. Heat smudges the ink. Pressure folds the pages. And yet, like a palimpsest, sometimes the traces remain. An echo of a sentence that was once carved, now blurred into sediment. Could someone have stood here before us? Not just life, not just cells in the sea, but someone or something capable of asking questions, shaping tools, building patterns, wondering if they too were alone. We dig for artifacts of our ancestors, and sometimes we find more than we expected. Not more objects, but more absence. The kind that feels shaped, not random. The kind that feels like something was once there, and then wasn't. We measure the world in eras. The Cambrian, the Devonian, the Cretaceous. But who decided where the boundaries lie? Who named the thresholds? We did. And yet, the Earth never obeyed those lines. It moves according to cycles we only partially grasp: geological, magnetic, chemical, planetary. Could one of those cycles include intelligence? Not as a singular event, but as a recurring tide. A rise, a flowering, a fall, and then silence, until the next. The crust beneath our feet is old, but not ageless. Much of it has been recycled, subducted, melted, reborn. If a civilization had risen in deep time, how would we even know? Its monuments would be magma now, its libraries scattered into grains. But not all memory is erased so cleanly. What if the Earth keeps some questions hidden, not because they cannot be answered, but because they are not yet understood? What if the smoothest stones contain the most unsettling possibilities? We search for simplicity, but the ground offers complexity. It speaks in interrupted rhythms, in broken layers, in signals that sometimes feel out of place. A spike in isotopes, a fracture that doesn't belong. A sudden bloom of carbon in an ancient world with no obvious fire. We explain them as anomaly, but anomaly is a placeholder. A word we use when the question beneath our feet grows louder than we're ready to hear. What if, long ago, another intelligence asked the same things we do? Looked up at the stars, wondered where it came from, left something behind, not a ruin but a pattern. A message encoded not in language, but in the logic of stones. What if the Earth is waiting for us to notice? Or perhaps it's not waiting. Perhaps it doesn't care. But the question still rises, slow as magma, persistent as gravity. Who came before you? Not as a challenge, but as an invitation to wonder, to rethink what we know of time, to entertain the possibility that we are not the first to walk with awareness on this ancient world, that others, now unnamed, now unknown, may have once stood where we stand. And if they did they leave behind a question for us? A riddle in the strata, a message in the mineral, not for glory, not for memory, but as a mirror, to remind us that nothing is truly new, that even the act of asking, of seeking, has happened before. So when we press our palms to stone and listen, we are not just geologists or dreamers. We are part of a lineage of minds stretching back through deep time, most of them forgotten, some of them never recorded, but perhaps still present, still woven into the land beneath our feet. And so, the Earth does not offer easy answers. It never has, but it asks, again and again, in silence, in wait, in the slow movement of its bones. Who came before you? And what will you leave for those who come after? One day, the ground beneath us will rise. The cities will fall. The rivers will change course. The continents will rearrange themselves slowly, as they always have. What we know as home, as history, as civilization, will become something else, buried, shifted, worn. And all that we are, every structure, every idea, every breath, will dissolve into layers of sediment and silence. We are not outside of time. We are inside it. And we, too, will become fossils. Not tomorrow, not next century, but eventually, we will be reduced, distilled. Some of us may be preserved by accident, held in permafrost, in tar, in salt. But most of us, our cities, our data, our monuments, will return to dust. Yet even dust carries story. Fossils are not just bones. They are impressions, shadows, traces of motion, patterns in rock, a footprint turned to stone, a leaf skeleton pressed into shale. They are not complete, but they are enough to suggest that something once moved, once breathed, once lived. And that is what we will become, traces. But what kind? Will our memory be held in the bones of our buildings, the veins of our roads? Will it echo in the composition of the atmosphere, in the blackened seams of coal, in the layered dust of what we burned and built and broke? Or will it be subtler, a spike in carbon, a thin line of plastic sediment, a whisper of radiation in the isotopic rhythm of the crust? We've already changed the planet. We've sculpted rivers, raised temperatures, disrupted the carbon cycle, sent fragments of ourselves to orbit and left dust on the moon. We've etched our presence into every layer of Earth's skin, and all of it will settle, compress, fossilize. We are writing our story into the strata, not with words but with choices, not with permanence but with consequence. But what will that story say? Will the layer that bears our name speak of wisdom, of harmony, of a species that learned, slowly, to live within the rhythm of its planet? Or will it speak of speed, of hunger, of brilliance spent too fast? Maybe it will say neither. Maybe it will simply be a signal in the chemistry, a scar in the sediment, a reminder that something once stirred here, thought, created, reached, and then vanished. And perhaps, long after we are gone, someone will find it. Not us, not our children, but another intelligence, another cycle, another wave of awareness, born from new matter, built from different forms. Maybe they will rise from what we leave behind. Or maybe they will come after a long forgetting, from some separate chain of being we cannot imagine. And maybe they will ask the question we have asked of so many bones. Who were they? What did they know? What did they fear? What did they love and lose and hope to become? They will dig. They will measure. They will find our fossilized machines, our altered soils, our synthetic rocks. They will wonder at our chemicals, our alloys, our patterns. They may recognize us as intelligent, or they may see only a strange burst of complexity, too brief to understand. Perhaps they will miss the message entirely. Perhaps they will hold a fragment of what we built, some twisted piece of metal, some hardened shard of data, and ask, as we have asked, was this natural? Or was this a sign of mind? And in that moment we will have become what we've always studied, an echo in stone, a mystery. We often think of ourselves as observers, but we are also the observed. We are the bones yet to be discovered, the artifact buried beneath eons of forgetting. And if we are to become a question for the future, what kind of question should we be? Perhaps that is the real legacy, not what we preserve but what we inspire, not what we leave behind but what we provoke. Wonder, reflection, reverence, not through monuments but through the quiet evidence that we tried to understand where we were and what it meant to be alive at all. Because if we are the fossils of tomorrow, then we are not the end of the story. We are a chapter, a breath, a layer of time, and that is enough. Enough to remind whatever comes next that we were, that we asked, that we felt, that we looked to the stars and to the stone and tried, gently, desperately, to remember and to be remembered. So we walk gently now, across the surface of our world, knowing it will one day close over us, knowing we are both the writer and the writing, and deep beneath our feet, beneath all we've built, the earth listens, the layers form, the dust settles, the story continues, and somewhere in the silence, A question rises that no one can answer fully, but everyone must ask. Will they know we were here? Will they wonder who we were? And what, in the end, will we have taught the stone?